Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the pretty close to on-time Historic Preservation Commission meeting for Thursday, February the 15th. It is like 5:01. That's pretty darn record time. Let's see, I'll read this. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable Channel 6 and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, iOS, and Android devices using a free app called Cablecast and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. Meetings are also archived on the city website for viewing anytime at glendaleca.gov/agendas. For program schedules, call 818-548-4013. For public comments and questions during the meeting, you can call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. If you have any question about matters on the agenda or requests for assistance, please contact the city clerk at 818-548-2090 during regular business hours. Roll call, please, Mr. Platt.
All right. Commissioner Head?
Here.
Commissioner Yurka?
Here.
Commissioner Doom?
Here.
Commissioner Paul?
Here.
And Chair Craig Noddy.
I am here. So this evening, Commissioner Paul is not joining us in person. He is remote, and I would like to give him a moment to say hello.
Okay, hello. This is Commissioner Paul. I am remote, and I need to mention a couple of things. I'm only remote because I have COVID and I'm contagious. So there's a very specific reason why I'm not there in person. I also need to let the commission know that I am alone in the house with nobody over 18 in the house, or under 18 for that matter. So I'm legally obligated to let people know that I'm doing this alone.
Thank you very much. The agenda for the February 15 meeting, regular meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission, was posted on February the 11th on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Let's talk about the minutes. How's everybody feel about it? Any changes we need to talk about?
Nope, I like the format of voting.
All right. We do not need to vote on them, right?
Just a motion and a second.
Let's do it. Anyone?
Second.
We have a second. Let's get the motion.
I'll move to approve.
Okay. Motion and a second. Thank you. Doesn't matter what order they come in, does it, Jay?
Well, it does a little bit, but
Okay. Let's see. Oral communications. Do we have any speaker cards or phone calls?
no speaker cards, no phone calls. We do have 2 comment letters that were received about Rockhaven that were distributed to the commissioners.
Do you want me to read them?
Don't usually read them at length. If your choice as chair. So
Okay. Well, there are similar in nature, so why don't I read one of them? Maybe the shorter one. Okay. Dear Commissioners Craig Noddy, Head, Yurka, Paul, and Doom, the Rockhaven Sanitarium is an incredible part of Glendale's history. I should start out by saying this is from Mary Lynn Fisher. She's the president of the Crescenta Highlands Neighborhood Association, steering committee member, Crescenta Valley Community Association, and second vice president of the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council. The Rockhaven Sanitarium is an incredible part of Glendale's history. The Friends of Rockhaven have invested many years and countless volunteer hours attempting to preserve both the buildings and the sanitarium's heritage, including helping secure an $8 million grant from the state. To the dismay of Foothill residents, the City of Glendale, which has owned the property since 2008, has neglected crucial maintenance to the point that some historic buildings may be beyond restoration. when in April 2023, Friends of Rockhaven, in frustration over the city's inaction, which is most accurately described as demolition by neglect, filed suit to force the city to take necessary action and essentially comply with its own ordinances. The city retaliated by barring the Friends of Rockhaven from the property. Since then, a full season, and now a partial season, of historically heavy rains have done unknown damage to the buildings. As commissioners charged with overseeing the preservation of Glendale's historic buildings, you have the authority and the duty to visit the property, see the condition of the property for yourselves, and report to City Council. I urge you to do so. Time is running out for Rockhaven. Sincerely, Mary Lynn Fisher. The second letter was submitted by Susan Bolin. She's a Glendale resident. She's also Crescenta Highlands Neighborhood Association board member, a Crescenta Valley Community Association steering committee member, and Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council board member. I will say that the sentiment in her message is basically the same. She's
I was
encouraging
going to
commissioners.
suggest, since we read one, we should probably just read the other one,
Okay,
too.
here we go. Dear Commissioners Craignotti, Head, Yerkes, Paul, and Doom, I am writing to you today to urge you to take a fresh look at Rockhaven. You probably are aware that the City of Glendale purchased the historic property in 2008 with the intent of preserving the last existing sanitarium in La Crescenta and to create a museum to tell the stories of what happened there. You may also be aware that over the last 15 years, there have been a number of plans and promises for adaptive reuse of the buildings and that effort has been largely unsuccessful. The property and the cottages today sit and deteriorate, the worst case of demolition neglect that I have ever seen. From almost the beginning of this process, I have championed the community and civic leaders to support Rockhaven. I have met with the city manager and planning staff, as well as the Friends of Rockhaven, to help outline a vision for the space that would be a great benefit to the community. I am pleased that the property has been recognized and added to the state and national registries of historic resources, as well as received state funds in the amount of $8 million. And yet there it sits. Nothing is happening to protect it. For me, though, it's personal. My great-aunt Margaret stayed at Rockhaven for a while and benefited from its unique brand of care. I recently told part of her story in an article in CV Weekly, but there are many other stories to tell, like Rockhaven's founder, Agnes Richards, who was a visionary and an entrepreneur. To understand Rockhaven and its importance, you really must visit. You will see for yourself that the early 20th century craftsman cottages and Spanish colonial buildings with unique ironwork, colorful tile, and meandering gardens are worthy of preservation. When there, it feels like time has just stopped, and there is a sense of peace, or at least there was. Today, we need your help to save Rockhaven before it's too late. You have heard the reports. Come and see for yourself what all the chatter is about. Again, that's from Susan Bolin. Okay. Anyone want to say anything about that?
What is this? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
This is Commissioner Paul.
Hi, Paul. Commissioner Paul.
Hello. What is the latest situation with Rockhaven? Where does it stand today? I know that there was a lawsuit. What is the do we know if the city's trying to find developers for the property to restore it? Like, does anybody have any information on what the present status is?
Jay? I can help with that. There is a lawsuit. It's pending. We're in the discovery phase right now. The city over the years has had a couple of rounds of RFPs where we were looking to find development solutions that would bring the historic part of Rockhaven back to life and find uses that would provide for its ongoing upkeep and use. Those ended without any solutions being found for a variety of reasons. We don't have anything currently that I'm familiar with personally on the books, but it is the city's intention to ultimately find a use for the entire site that will keep it alive. And in response to these letters, just a couple of things I wanted to say. The city has never failed to look at this as a historic site. The city continues to look at it that way and will continue into the future. Yes, there were holes in the roof, and yes, there's been some water damage inside several of the buildings. This is not an example of demolition by neglect, in my professional opinion. Demolition by neglect is an intentional act by someone who wants a building to disappear. Even in my worst, blackest moment, I've never thought that the city is trying to make Rockhaven disappear. I know there may be people in the community who disagree with me on that, but I feel from my inside perspective that I'm right about that. The Facilities Division of the Public Works Department is responsible for aspects of the upkeep at Rockhaven, though it is managed by the Community Services and Parks Department. We recently, using money from the $8 million grant from Senator Anthony Portantino, put a new roof on the Pines Cottage. So the Pines Cottage has a new underlayment, new decking, new underlayment, and Spanish clay tiles. It looks really good. The other buildings have all been tarped professionally with the heaviest duty tarps. You know, we've tarped the buildings on and off over the years. Those tarps failed in the UV light conditions. They weren't properly, updated. So this was a much more expensive and durable kind of solution. And our team has been out there after each of the recent rains to inspect and make sure that the new roof and the tarps are working. And I wasn't there, but I've been told that by the guy who was there that everything is working well. The tarps are still in place. There were high winds whipping through the area. That's the biggest problem with tarps, when the wind gets under them. That didn't happen. So everything's intact, everything's watertight. And that's the update that I've got for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to say, since this issue's come up before, and because Rockhaven is so important, and it's because it's been controversial for like a decade, although more recently, more urgently in the last couple of years, I do think it's a very good idea for the HPC to have a tour of it. And I know that if the 5 of us go to Rockhaven, it needs to be noticed as a public meeting. I believe that's the case, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that. From my perspective, it would not need to substitute for one of our third Thursday in the month meetings. We could possibly find a time when we could make it otherwise. But I do think it would be, we have the authority and the responsibility to visit the property. I think I'm inclined to agree with that sentiment. So I don't know what is required for that to happen. Perhaps if my fellow commissioners could express a desire or an opinion, then maybe we could come to some sort of agreement about whether we should do that or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we should do an on-site visit.
Yeah, and I can certainly make arrangements for that to happen. The question I have is whether that would be the full commission visiting, making it an open meeting, requiring public access, or if we would have to do it similar to the way we do site visits for Glendale Register properties, 2 by 2 by 1, or 1 by 1 by 1 by 1, or whatever permutation you like there. That's something I would check with the city attorney to see what their thoughts are on that. And then we could certainly arrange with facilities and parks to get access.
Great. I would certainly be open to seeing.
So I will try to make, I'll begin the discussion, next week, and then hopefully have word back to you before the next meeting in terms of what the process, how we'll do it, and then just figure out dates from that point.
Thank you.
I have a question, Jay. Has HPC had any or provided any input for the RFPs in the past?
No, and we don't do that. Our boards and commissions don't review the RFPs.
So there isn't an opportunity to make recommendations or suggestions or anything like that for the RFP from a HPC standpoint?
Well, we don't have a standing RFP right now. What I expect to happen is, as long as this waterproofing stays intact, economic development has been involved in looking to see what the potential uses and users of the site could be. So that I imagine will be the next step. I just don't know and didn't have the foresight to ask if there's anyone talking about that right now before tonight's meeting. I could bring it up as an update
Yeah,
at the next meeting.
just curious if there's an opportunity, if not for HPC, but for the public to make suggestions or
Yeah,
recommendations.
I can't imagine that we'll be opening RFPs to public input in general.
The actual request for proposals, no, right? Is that what you're asking?
No,
Yeah,
not
really
the
that.
the public can certainly
unless
comment on what the needs are, what their dreams are, what their hopes are, that's welcome. And we've had that with when the various user groups were proposing to city council, those were open public meetings where their proposals were part of the public record, and people could comment on what uses they thought were appropriate, what they liked, what they didn't like. And unfortunately, none of those proposals ever moved forward, so.
Got it. Yeah, I wasn't thinking of soliciting, but in terms of community input.
Oh, yeah,
feedback.
definitely. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was being very literal about the RFP part of that, so.
Commissioner Doom, do you have anything?
No, I'd love to go when
Okay.
you arrange a meeting.
Okay.
And I think if we all go at the same time, we could all hear the presentation at once and not dribble or repeat 3 or 4 times.
Is there a presentation?
If we were to learn about.
You'll have a guide, and you'll learn about what's going on and walk the site.
If
I
it
would
becomes a
pro-
public meeting, then people could, the public could join us. The
people
public
might
would be
be
invited
there.
to join us, right? No, honestly, the public would be invited to join us, right?
We can't do an HPC 5-member, 4-member, or even 3-member visit without it being a public meeting, noticed, and open to the public.
To be clear, we would love to have you. That was not meant to be anything but that. So that is something we would have to consider,
The city attorney.
whether we're doing all of
Yeah, and that's part of what I'll try to get some info next week and get back to you. And then, depending on the answer, we can start scheduling. I'll have to talk to, it'll be a little bit of juggling between the different departments, but there are people who've led tours, I've led tours,
Great.
and it should work out.
Anything else? Commissioner Paul, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I have a question. Yes, I'm definitely interested in seeing Rock Haven again. I haven't been in over 20 years. But is there a difference in access to what we could see if we just went as 2x2 or 2x2 versus if it was a whole public meeting? In other words, I want to be sure that I could see as much of Rock Haven as possible. If it's a public meeting because of health and safety issues or something else, would we then be prohibited from being able to see certain parts of Rock Haven that we would otherwise be able to see if it was just us splitting up?
No, I think the tour would be the same. If there was a large group of members of the public there, we'd probably have to split it up even more. And there may be access issues inside the buildings. I've been told there's some mold remediation or mold issues that haven't been remediated. And so we'd have to talk to our risk management division or the people in the city manager's office who handle that sort of stuff. So there's, it's a little bit complicated, but we can definitely make it happen. So
I'll bring an
you-
N95. I think
What's
we'll be
that?
I'll bring an N95. I'm ready.
very good.
Anything else,
You might
Commissioner
need
Paul?
more than that.
Okay. Anything else, Commissioner Paul?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. I guess the only question I would have would be, okay, so we've all 2x2x1 have gone to see the property. I imagine there's probably a lot of things we could talk about Rock Haven, obviously right now, because this is oral communications. Could we agendize a conversation after we had that
Agenda is a
tour?
conversation. Ultimately, the commission's not in a position to make plans or direct any of the city's staff divisions or departments, but you can have discussions that could then be, if there was consensus, for example, that could be brought back to city council through each of your appointors, and then city council could, at least hear what HPC's opinion on it is. I'm not sure how that would work. I've never given an update at council like that, so it might have to go through you. But it's possible we could do it as a department, so.
The call to action in these letters is not just for us to visit, but to communicate with council. And so what I'm asking, I guess, is I would be open to the idea of having a discussion here among all of us that we could then, as a group, present some thoughts to council, unless what you're saying is that it's maybe not necessarily protocol to do that, and we should go to our individual council members for those.
I think having the discussion without any vote or decision, but if there's consensus among you, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were, that could be conveyed to council. You know, the Historic Preservation recommends that council prioritize finding a user and a solution to the ongoing vacancy of Rockhaven. And that could
That's
be
all we
like,
can say. We could probably say that now. Not to say I don't want to go visit, but
No,
I feel
but-
like it would be nice if, I guess I'm wondering if there's any, I can't even imagine what a more robust comment would be, having not visited the property. But like, for instance, you said that there was an $8 million grant and one of the roofs has been replaced and two of them have been tarped. Presuming these buildings are not going to be taken down because they're historic resources, why don't we use some of the $8 million to re-roof the other two buildings? Probably didn't cost $8 million to do the first one,
definitely
right?
something that was considered, but part of that grant is also to fund a museum use on the site. So we just will have to kind of look at the various options. And I don't see any issue with you weighing in and offering options to, or
I think we would probably,
ideas to council. I'll look into this. This is
can
this
do
is
about that?
slightly unusual, but I don't think it's outside of the purview of what the
spirit of what we're trying to do.
yeah, what Title 2.76 says you can do, and since it's a publicly owned building, I think having HPC weigh on it sure makes sense.
Great. Thank you, ladies, for the letters. That's it for oral communication, right? Or actually, did you want to speak? He does want to speak. Well, hello there.
Fill out your card later.
If you don't mind introducing yourself, sir. Welcome.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, staff. My name is Grant Michaels. I am the president of the Montrose Verdugo City Spar Heights Neighborhood Association. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak after running up the stairs.
Yes. Catch your breath a moment.
So, first, let me go ahead and offer our congratulations to Jeffrey Head for being the newest commissioner. We did watch your introduction and believe you'll be a good commissioner on this HPC. To follow up my comments from a few months ago on this very topic, I did want to just go ahead and encourage you to continue to follow up and pay attention to Rockhaven, and encourage you to visit the site and provide an independent evaluation of the site. I know that there were comments, and I won't beleaguer this, but speaking as a commissioner from the Parks and Community Services Commission, as Jay said, there is precedent and there is a little procedure, but the commission can go ahead and meet outside of chambers, visit a site. I did so at Duke Magian when I was a commissioner on the CSP. With Rockhaven being a closed site, I'm sure there'll be a few other restrictions and it will likely be a closed meeting. But I have heard from many in the community that do care about Rockhaven, do want to see an independent evaluation, and want to make sure that this is a property that is not forgotten or further neglected. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels. Now catch your breath. Okay, moving on. Do we have any commissioner comments?
Yes.
Great. Commissioner Doom.
First, on behalf of former Commissioner Morgan, I'd like to reintroduce one of his favorite items is a meeting of the Historical Society of Crescenta Valley. Their next meeting is February 19th, and it's a great discussion on wine in the history of Los Angeles. And that takes place at the Church Center for Spiritual Living, 4845 Dunsmore at 7 p.m. Monday, February 19th. He didn't tell me if there's any tasting involved, just that it's a history of Los Angeles wine.
I was going to say, is there a corkage fee?
Yeah, no, I didn't say about a corkage fee, sadly. And then, as on behalf of every social studies teacher and American in the city, I ask you to remind you to vote on Tuesday, March 5th. We have a number of races, and it's a great contested election. You all focus on local races for school board, city council, state assembly, state senate, our next U.S. representative, and even U.S. senator. So those are my public comments on elections and Historical Society.
Thank you, Commissioner Doom. Commissioner Paul, do you have any comments?
No, I do not.
Okay. Commissioner Yurka.
Thank you. I just wanted to report with sadness, not quite despair, about the illegal demolition at Faze that took place in Montrose over the weekend. I'm sure you're all familiar with Faze. It was a let us say, a time capsule. I would be tempted to refer to it as a lingerie store, but it was more.
Lingerie store with flannel nightgowns.
But it was like flannel nightgowns from the 50s store. But it was the site, the interior site of a lot of filming, and it was really a very special and continues to be, although with now modifications, exterior along Honolulu as well. This illegal demolition is particularly troubling because it took place on Sunday and the farmers market was in progress, and there were pieces of the building like falling onto the sidewalk as people were walking by. A resident sent me videos and photographs, and it was really a particularly pernicious example of a certain philosophy that one does encounter in the city from time to time, which is, ask forgiveness, not permission. The city did issue, the police came, the city issued a stop work order, and they will be reviewing it. There were no permits. In addition to the exterior work, there is apparently, I've heard, substantial interior demolition as well, also unpermitted. So I was glad that the city took action, and I hope that the community will be updated because that was a real, we can't preserve Faze, obviously. It went out of business, but the building is rather special. Thank you.
Do you know if it was the building owner or the tenant that was doing that? Does anybody know? I'm just curious.
I do not know.
The owner was involved. So.
Owner
Well,
wasn't?
we'll be meeting with the owner on site on Wednesday with people from Building and Safety Engineering, Eric Kraus, me. I'm not sure if anyone else from the city's going.
Big guns. Look at that. Good.
So yeah, the goal is to reconstruct.
Great.
May I say a couple of things about this?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is really, I did not know about this. I appreciate Commissioner Yurka bringing this to the fore. This is very upsetting. This is to our commercial vernacular architecture is incredibly important. And there is the option there that building seems like it could have been either clearly eligible as a locally listed property, or it would be nice to maybe look at a potential district along Honolulu at some point. When I was on the Los Angeles Conservancy's Modern Committee years ago, I do recall another illegal demolition in Downey for Johnny's Broiler, and there is a precedent for having owners reconstruct illegal demolitions. So this has happened before, and that became a Bob's Big Boy that ended up becoming quite successful. This is a very special building. Honolulu Boulevard is incredibly special, and this was a keystone building on Honolulu. And I'm thankful to hear that Jay is going to be talking with the owner. And I hope that there will be some real action here, not just lip service. And as Commissioner Yurka said, just apologizing and then moving forward with whatever they were proposing before.
Thank you.
What's interesting is Faze was a remodel in 1965 of a streamlined modern bank, which itself was really cool. We've internally discussed what if someone proposes returning it to the bank, and that's a valid question, a valid request, and we would deal with that if it comes. I have a feeling it's not coming, but
Wow,
but
that's interesting.
it was a pretty cool building from the start.
Wow. Commissioner Head, any thoughts? Okay. I don't have any either, so we're going to move on. We have no old business. We have no new business, but here we are today because we do have discussion items. Discussion regarding procedure for assessing applications for Mills Act applications for historic district contributors. Hold on tight, everybody. I do want to point out one thing.
Yes.
Mr. Doom are the only ones that were here. So when all of this really went down. And so I trust that the three of us and you can make sure that our fellow commissioners are really up to speed on everything that we're talking about. So I'm going to start with your...
Mr. Paul told me he reviewed every minute of the extensive video archive, which is a
when
very
you have
bold,
COVID and nothing to do, that
very
sounds
bold
great.
thing to do. Mr. Head may have done the same. I'm sure Ms. Yurka has done the same thing. So
I did too, and in the spirit of the discussion, I am wearing the same shirt I wore in October 2022. So here we go.
those were the days.
August 2020, we're here alone.
Oof, yeah, that's right, the good old days.
All right.
All right,
So,
Mr. Platt.
the discussion, this was heard, we brought forward 2 applications for Mills Act contracts in historic districts per the policy that we were directed to implement by City Council. And the discussion ended up kind of devolving away from actively considering the 2 applications into what is this program? How is it working? Why are we doing this? It was a fairly wide-ranging and, let's say, discursive discussion. I had promised that I was going to try to give you a summary of it. I started writing that out. It was a little difficult to do, and I'm very happy that you all have done your homework, because I want to leave it kind of wide open. I see 2 potential outcomes, though, that the discussion tonight could lead to. One is a decision to move forward with the 2 open applications that were continued from that hearing in 2022. And if we do that, we need to maintain the system that was presented to council and to you and that was presented at that hearing in large part. There are some, I think I mentioned at the hearing, we could do some tweaks of pieces of it. But if we were going to step away and say, hey, we don't want to do the point system, or we don't want to do some other aspect of it, that I think we'd have to bring back to City Council. So if you could gear your discussion, and Mr. Craignotti is chair, if you could guide us into, and maybe I'm missing something, so there may be a 3rd or 4th option, but if we could guide the discussion toward a decision by the end of this evening in terms of what do we do? Do we take this to council, or do we move forward with the 2 applications, and then we can discuss whatever tweaks that you're interested in making to the process as proposed?
Okay, so here are the concerns, here are the questions I have and concerns that I have. I personally, having been, and Mr. Doom can maybe concur or not concur, having been through the process already, and I watched it again just before this meeting, so it would be fresh in my mind, all of that discussion and the discussion we had afterwards. And I personally did find the implementation of the direction to be a little bit confusing and a little bit deeper than I was anticipating it to be. So when it was all presented to us the first time, it was a little bit overwhelming. Having gone back and looked at the notes and the staff reports about what we were expected to receive, I'm not suggesting that what staff gave us that night was anything different than what they said they were going to give us. It was just the actuality of it all was a lot more, a little bit heavier than I thought it was going to be. So my question for you is, if we decide we want to have a discussion about modifying, and you sort of answered this in your opening statement, but I'm going to ask it anyway, modifying this process that these homes will go through, how much can of it is enough process that staff internally can just modify without essentially going to council and opening a whole can of worms? And the reason I am concerned about that is we just went through a whole rigmarole about the streamlining of the process, and that can of worms just like one of those peanut cans. And every time I feel like something goes before the council regarding historic designations and preservation and all of that stuff, everybody comes out and we re-adjudicate the entire process, or the entire concept. And what I don't want to do is do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, we know the council we have right now. We don't know the council we're going to have in 2 months from now. I'm afraid that we could present this to a council that maybe doesn't have the experience with this slightly niche subject. You know, I don't know that I would ever want to be a council person, because you have to become an expert in so many different areas of government, and I don't know that I have that. And I would not expect new council people to be up to speed immediately on this particular aspect of our government. So I hesitate to decide to try to recreate the process if it is going to then involve council's involvement, I guess, is where I'm going. So I guess my question to you is, how much of the system that you very tirelessly and very impressively created can we dismantle without, or modify, without actually having to go back to council? And when you say go back to council, do you mean present it in a city council meeting and have all of this stuff? Or is it just like in an internal meeting where you say, okay, this is what we're talking about?
No such thing as an internal
So
meeting.
it would have to be
yeah.
HPC, after having received their first applications and been presented and having to discuss them and decide about them, realized that there are maybe what they feel are some flaws in the process, and these are their suggestions on how to fix it. That's going to be in a public meeting, everyone's going to comment, and it's going to be a whole thing, right? So what can we do that doesn't involve that? Or what can you do that doesn't involve that? ultimately?
I don't want to be, blithe about this, but I think we'll know it when we see it. I don't know what the answer to that is, and it may even require no answer tonight, because I may have to talk to the city attorney or to someone else to just make sure we're taking this in the right direction. So, and also remember that the same fear that you have of the can of worms at council, this will go to council ultimately if we move these two applications forward. The same thing could happen at that point. So I don't want to misplace the fear, but I know that the election's coming up. I don't know what we're going to get agendized before the next, we have one meeting before the election, I believe, so.
I have one more quick question. So then the presentation that we received in 2022, had we approved them and said move them forward, recommend them to the council, would the council have read this? They would have received the same in-depth presentation that we got, the points and the this and the that. It may have had some modifications to it because we talked about taking a sewer thing out of one, they would have gotten the sort of revised version of the chart and the grid. But they would have gotten that same whole lengthy, in-depth.
It would be similar. Council, sometimes we try to, streamline it a little bit, especially if it's more of the minor points. But the staff report would have all of the information. The presentation at council might be a little briefer.
Okay. Commissioner Yurka.
I wanted to agree with you that I think ideally we want to come up with something that will not need to return to council. And so that I think we should try to work with council direction as best we can. And then if there's a point where we really just feel that's the wrong move, we can make a decision at that point. I thought in terms of trying to have a less discursive discussion about this than happened in 2022, even though I thought it was a very good, it was a lot, and I thought the discussion was entirely appropriate. I thought it might be helpful to break down the discussion into some of the questions that got raised by the HPC members, and there may be additional ones. But so I came up with a couple of things that I thought were relevant. One is the question of work that's visible versus work like foundation bolting, dealing with plumbing and electrical, so exterior versus interior, if you want to put it that way. One is the question of how we think about the relationship between the Glendale Register and the contributor, specifically the idea of the requirements that we have for the Glendale Register versus things that we may not require of Glendale Register properties, but might be beneficial changes that we would want to include. And then there's the question about how we want to handle the points and the ratio. And it may be that is something that could be tweaked rather than jettisoned, because I gather from Jay that if we get rid of it, that's something that would need to go back to council. So I don't know if anyone had identified other kind of like this versus this. The other one I think was first come, first serve versus a ranking, and I think we kind of got hung up, and I think rightly, on that term competition.
Yes.
But I do think the idea of a ranking is useful, and I think Jay was really clear. He said, I cannot support a first come, first served, and I do think that if Jay can't support it and we were to switch to that, that would have to go to council, and the council would also not support it. So I would say that we want some kind of ranking among applications, assuming that we get multiple applications. But so maybe that's something that we can just resolve right now.
And if I can just, we can pretty much, in this case at least, ranking, competition, to me they're very similar, if not the same in this case. If someone is 1 and someone is 2, well, 1 has done something more worthy of a Mills Act contract than 2 has, and while not, it's like competing for GPA. You may not be actively doing it when you're in school, but someone's going to have a higher GPA than someone else.
I guess the problem I have with it is it feels like it's grading on a curve, and there may be 2 properties at that particular meeting that are being presented together that have this particular point numbering totals, right? Here and here, or here and here, whatever it is. The next week or the next time we see them, one of them could be way more superior, that if it had been adjudicated with the other top one, it would, I guess,
I mean, from year to year.
yeah, to me, it seems like if there's going to be a rank, if there's going to be this attempt at objectivity, it feels like this is the bar. You either meet the bar or you don't meet the bar. It's not whether or not there's 2 of you and one of you are a higher number than the other one, or both of you we think are high enough. It just seems like there's either a yes or a no point to the points. Maybe there's just a threshold. You've got to reach this, and if you don't, thank you. And we have to. The spirit of this, again, I think, Jay, maybe before we start the discussion, for the benefit of the commissioners, despite the fact that they have watched everything, but maybe also more so for the public who's watching that probably didn't, can you just maybe kind of remind everybody the spirit of what this was about, what the vision was behind all of this? We know it was some pressure from TGHS, Historical Society, that started this. You are ready to go.
I brought back
great.
some of our old slides in case we wanted to go there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So why don't you just run down that whole little thing fairly swiftly?
Okay, so council did direct us to create this. It was brought to them by TGHS, which is why HPC didn't look at it before council did. They requested we come back to council with a proposal. Included in this was that we would allow contributors that are not eligible for the Glendale Register to qualify for this ranked
Yes.
ranked system of possibly being eligible for a Mills Act contract. Valuation caps were added. Some of this was based on comparisons with other cities and just basic sense of fairness. Values have changed. I'm sure, Chris, you know this very well, that
Certainly since
1.5 million
2016.
doesn't buy you much these days in Glendale, but there are still properties under that amount. And then 3 million for other property types besides single family. We made a big effort when we presented this to council. I thought, and I was mistaken, has been proven by history, I thought there would be a deluge of applications. I thought everyone who hears about this is going to want it. We are still sitting on the same 2 applications that we've been sitting on for several years now.
I've heard the rumors.
Well, maybe they've been dissuaded by watching this process. I don't know. And it's even in the Living with History pamphlet that went out, and haven't gotten any calls about it. Which isn't to say we won't get a deluge at some point, but I don't think we need to focus too much on these minimums. And I know the issue of that we could grant 2 applications per year came up as an issue because we were only looking at 2. It was my opinion that even if we have 2 applications, if the commission finds at the end of the process that they're not worthy, we do not have to give Mills Act contracts just because
Just because we can't.
they're there. So prepare up to 2 contracts. So those, the second, third, fourth, and fifth bullet point, unless you want to talk about it more, we don't really need to cover much. We created an application submittal and processing schedule. We created a new application that takes into account the new information that we need as part of the application for this. And just so the public knows, we felt that when a Mills Act contract is awarded to a Glendale Register property, it's already passed a fairly high hurdle to be a significant property in the history of the development of the city. Historic district properties that are not eligible for the Glendale Register are not in themselves historic. They contribute to the broader historicity of the neighborhood. And so the idea that there'd be a different system for Mills Acts and districts is kind of predicated on that. The word competitive is still here, so let's develop a ranked, merit-based system for reviewing applications for consideration by both HPC and council. And HPC's and CDD's design review authority would extend to all exterior portions of the property, which is what we do for Glendale Register properties, but not for your standard historic district property. We would also be able to look at, as Kathy mentioned, some interior work aspects when they relate to structural and life safety issues. So electrical upgrades, seismic upgrades, things like that.
Oh, could I interrupt? Because I'm thinking as much as possible, if we can maybe just check off certain things, because I think in relation to your question, Chris, about the bar, I don't know that we have to make a formal decision that there's going to be a bar and that people can't reapply. But I think as a commission, I mean, if we can tell 2 applicants, neither of you, we don't think either of these are worthy of Mills Act contracts, I think we could tell the bottom 3, yes, try again next year, you 2, this really doesn't seem to meet the threshold. So I would say that's not something that we would have to hammer out.
I don't understand the try again next year. Either they qualify or they don't?
Well, what if if we only give 2, if you've got 5 and 3 seem really worthy, we could encourage
see.
that to go.
We can give these 2,
extend
third
over.
one, come back next year.
Yeah.
We can also give 3. We put the caveat in that if time allows, we can do more. It's not on this slide, but it's in the.
Oh, I thought it was if we didn't get 4.
We can do more than 4 Glendale Register. It's up to 2 contracts. Council did not want more than 2 contracts for Mills Act contributors.
Okay, you're probably right about that. In fact, I'm going to say you are right about that. I shouldn't ever doubt that.
Maybe to your point, maybe we should try to tackle these one at a time. You started to show the next slide,
sorry,
and I
yeah.
just was like, I don't know if we really want to go over the next
But
slide.
are there any questions so far?
Why don't you pop up the next slide and see if this is one we... No, I'm wondering if this is...
Next slide is just going over the points chart.
Yeah.
This is a place where tweaking is certainly doable.
Okay.
Council never saw, they saw the concept of the points chart. They understood that was part of the basis that goes into our calculation of the final point score that properties get. This was something I put some serious thought into, but at the same time, I also know that there are things missing here. In practice, you realize, oh, I didn't think about that, and we have to take that into account. Those are all things we could do at HPC meetings. If someone came in with a work item unexpected that isn't here, like for example, I put chimneys in here. So anyways, so if you want to play with this, that's something we can come back to. Any thoughts right now, though?
No, let's...
Looks great.
Yeah, let's move on
You've got
to the
good
next slide.
eyes.
Let's move on to the next slide for now.
Yeah. And then this is the chart where, and to Commissioner Cragnotti's point, this is I did make an attempt to create a level playing field through this calculation that we're proposing, and council also didn't see. Actually, I can't remember if this may not have been fully developed at that point, but the idea definitely was presented. By assuming that everyone gets a baseline 50% reduction, which is in keeping, it's less than what most people get. That, to me, helped figure out, okay, what are we looking at in terms of total savings to an applicant over the course of 10 years as a 10-year contract, even though we know it continues into the future. And so I created some examples where if we control this calculation, well, first I created the ratio of expenditure to savings, so that there's a factor that goes into this calculation. And we look at the points. So I controlled in this first example, so all 3 applications have 15 points, but some of the work on one of the houses costs substantially more than on the other 2. And you can see how the point scores kind of play out in that way, where the more, I mentioned several times, I don't love the term bang for the buck, but I seem to use it a lot. But the idea is, when we know that a house requires significant work, and this is something that was discussed at the in 2022, where we're not looking at properties that have high integrity generally as good candidates for this. When they're identified in the historic district surveys, it's those that have moderate integrity that would likely be the best candidates. We wouldn't tell someone with a high integrity property they can't or shouldn't apply, but that would probably factor in. And a lower integrity property probably would need more of an expense than a higher integrity property, but that's not necessarily true. So anyways, we controlled for the plan points, and then we also controlled for expenditure. And so you can see in each case, we're coming out with points that give us, some clear-cut divisions between properties, as we saw. And we're not talking about the 2 properties that we've already heard, but we saw in that case the numbers came out fairly close, especially in one of the scenarios. And at that point, it's like, how do you parse between a 0.12 difference? I don't know. That's your job, not mine. So,
And honestly, I think that's kind of where we got hung up a little bit, was because we kept using.
I copied the wrong slide. I copied one of those properties, but we're not going to look at that.
I think we kind of got up, at least I did, a little bit hung up on because the word competition kept getting used, I felt like we were in a position where we had to pick one over the other. And because the point totals were so close, it was like, well, this seems really, it felt like a tie, Anyway, we're not talking about those 2. So do you have more you want to present?
Well, we also, so I mentioned the moderate integrity, and then we also, in the presentations, I gave real-world calculations based on the cost estimates that we were getting from the applicants of what their savings would be over 10 years. So we see that in the previous,
I think the top one.
Oh, the top one, yeah. The last column has the savings. When you start looking at if a property, in this example of the $1 million house, $5,000 savings every year into perpetuity, and so in the first 10 years, just to control the calculation, they get $50,000. When we start looking at their property tax savings over time, that could factor into the commission's consideration, going back to bang for the buck, of, if someone's going to be receiving $100,000 over 10 years and they're putting $30,000 into the property, is that enough? Is that what you want? And that's ultimately your decision, council's decision. I don't think I'm going to have any calculation for that, but that I think would factor into your decision making.
Is there anyone who has an issue with, because I know the point system, I think it seemed particularly confusing because or I should say the HPC, because I had to recuse myself, not only had the points awarded, but had the introduction of the point system at the same time. So it was a lot to make sense of. Is there anyone who still has an issue with the point system?
I think the idea of a point system, not necessarily. Some kind of ranking system, no. The specific categories in this specific point system, yes. I think that we should really reevaluate the things that we're evaluating.
Okay, so that may be the exterior, interior question.
Exterior, interior, yes, systems versus,
But in
yes.
terms of points being an acceptable metric, and I'm distinguishing between points and the ratio. So just assigning points to.
Yeah. I still need to hear a lot more about it, but in theory, as long as if the point system is used to come up with some kind of like a bar that people meet, then if it takes a point system to get us there, because everyone's wanting to make this a very objective process, but we know that it is there's very subjective elements to it. It doesn't seem like there should be, but there kind of is. And so if we are trying to make this as objective as possible, it seems to be just needs to be a threshold they have to meet. And if they don't meet it, I don't know that that's something staff would necessarily say to begin with. Although, when we talk about Glendale Register properties, there are properties that people apply that don't come before us, right? Or not? Are there properties that get applications that come in for Glendale Register properties that we don't ever see, that you work with the homeowner to tell them whether
If
or not?
someone withdraws their application, I talk to a lot of people who I tell them, like, I don't think this is a strong candidate, but it's your right to apply. And some people don't want to go through the process unless, a lot of people are really just interested in the Mills Act. They don't call, they don't say, hey, I'm interested in Glendale Register. And oh, by the way, maybe some taxes too.
And I'm sure you get a lot of people that just don't really understand what it is anyway, and it's...
Yeah, so that's, that happens definitely.
So I guess what I'm getting at is with this threshold, if we were to establish some sort of threshold or minimum bar that a property needs to meet based on a system of points, it's possible that some just couldn't even come to us. You would have, the application would come in, you do your evaluation, this would be their score, and it's not high enough to reach the bar, it doesn't even come to us. I'm not saying that's how I want it to be. I'm saying if we do create some kind of objective thing like that, then it doesn't even come before us and there's nothing for us to even deliberate. So I don't know that necessarily that kind of a system is appropriate.
Yeah,
You'll always be involved in this because you have to make a recommendation about Mills Act contracts to council.
I have a question about this ranking or the rating. Is this something that would be shared with an applicant in the process of their submitting an application? Like in the course of writing their application, would they know what
They would know before we went to HPC with their application.
It's a pretty far down the line.
What we do is we require a pretty intensive work plan from the applicants, and we ask for estimates and hopefully proof of those estimated costs. When we haven't, we have limited experience, obviously, but we did run those by the building official previously to just say, hey, is this a ballpark number for this kind of work, X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, well, part of the reason I ask is because some people may select themselves out. They may decide, oh, there isn't enough tax savings, or they're not going to meet the enough, they're not going to get enough points. They already know that, so they're not going to apply. But they're not going to know that unless they have, the criteria that you're working with. So that's a question of, at what point would it be shared? Because I really think that some applicants will just eliminate themselves, much like Jay just described, where, they don't want to do the application.
Well, when the application comes in, I'm going to review it before I start preparing a staff report or assigning points to anything. And if I look at an application and the house is a high integrity contributor and they don't have a lot of work on their agenda, I might tell them, like, hey, I'm not sure where this is going to come in. I always try to give people a realistic expectation, but then also say, but it's totally your right to come forward with this. We're going to move you forward regardless. And I hope they take that. I try to be as not overly persuasive. It's like just give them a kind of realistic look. So I think that would take care of what you're asking about to some degree.
Yes, it would. I'm just sort of putting myself in place of a homeowner in a historic district, and I want to, before I do the application or go through the process of submitting an application, I want to figure out if I'm a good candidate to begin with, and if I had this ranking or rating that you're using, then it would just be easier for me to decide on my own whether or not I wanted to do an application.
I hear your point. I don't think that's going to be a real issue. I think once people decide they want to do this, they're probably going to go forward with an application. And we do the vetting early, just like we do with the Glendale Register. If someone submits a nomination for a house that clearly is never in a million years going to get on there, I'm going to tell them that and tell them, hey, you can keep going if you want, but it's not you're not a great candidate.
Do you feel good? You got your answer? Okay. Back to Kathy's question to everybody else, because I was sort of the only one that answered, was the points question. Does anyone else have an issue with the point? Was that your question, Kathy?
Yeah, is that something at this point that we can agree on?
Yeah. So anyone else have comments about the point system in general? Commissioner Paul?
Yes. I'll just try to keep to talking about the points. By the way, I hear my voice lagging, so there's a lag, so pardon me if I seem distracted. So I like the point system. I don't have a problem with the concept of a point system. I see the necessity of a point system, especially once we're dealing with beyond 2 contributor applications a year for the Mills Act, which I think is inevitable. I think there definitely will be more. I think Jay's done a very good job here. I could definitely see some tweaks and adjustments to how specifically points are delegated or how that works. But I understand the need for this rather than just basing it off of cost alone, or other things. So I do see the need for this point system, and I'm supportive in concept of a point system for Mills Act for the contributors within Glendale.
Okay, thank you.
If I can throw something in based on Chris's comments, I don't know, I can't get my head around what the threshold would be. I wouldn't know how to determine that threshold, especially year after year, assuming we're getting cases coming in. Everyone's going to be different. Every situation is going to be different. And 1 year's threshold might be too high for 1 year's applicants. And I don't see any point in having a threshold if we're constantly adjusting it year to year, where if we just come in and we have a list of here's the top points and here's the low points, and you're still able, and I think I put it in the staff report, it's not here, you're not obligated, I don't think I've ever said this, to say, okay, the top 2 are getting it. Number 4 may be a different type of house, and you think, wow, the visual impact on the street is going to be so profound for this work, even if that work is costing less and they're not getting as many points as something else, you may want to have that flexibility.
Okay, sorry. Let me just respond to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the most objective thing you've said all night. So you're trying to create an objective sort of system out of something that you've just explained is 100% subjective. So it really is, if it really is on a house-by-house basis, we don't need a point system at all. We can evaluate it in much the same way we evaluate our registered properties at that point. It's bang for the buck. What is the bang for the buck if someone restores this property? Is it that, will it really have an impact on the district? Will it really have an impact on the neighborhood? Because I didn't mean to suggest when I was talking about a threshold or a bar that it would ever adjust. This is the bar from year to year. It's 30 points. If you don't get 30 points, because of the fact that we have this point system, 30 points, 25 points just isn't enough. It just means that there's not enough work that needs to be done because the point system is designed to reward the homes that need the most work. So if we've got a baseline threshold that 30 points means, I'm making these numbers up, 30 points means this house is, let me go at it this way. The thing that kind of strikes me a little bit as frustrating about the whole idea of this is that it's only for contributing properties. We know that there are properties that are considered non-contributing that if they hadn't had so many alterations to them, would be contributing. I would much rather see this program going towards non-contributors that could be brought into contributing nature than properties that are already contributing.
You and me and all right-thinking people, but council didn't see it that way.
Okay.
We strongly recommended that they include non-contributors in this, and they very specifically said no. They didn't get it.
And I
don't
totally
think.
understand that if we wanted that to change, it would have to go to council, and that's the can of worms thing. But because we are really talking about a small subset of homes, because it has to be just contributing enough that it's considered a contributor, but not such a high integrity contributor that there's not a lot of work to do. So it seems to me that's a pretty small band, potentially a small band, because certainly there's hundreds of contributors.
Hundreds and hundreds of properties.
No, we don't know that it's hundreds and hundreds of
It is
properties
hundreds and
of
hundreds of properties that are moderate integrity contributors.
Except that it doesn't sound like moderate's enough. Okay. I don't remember the DPR forms for the two properties that we already saw. Were they considered high contributors or not high contributors? Isn't there a thing that says it has an excellent amount of integrity? It seems to me they should have been dissuaded from coming forward anyway. I get that they were our first ones, fine, and maybe in the future the bar will be.
The system's going to get refined over time, definitely.
Yeah.
My memory is they were high integrity, but I can't say
It
for
seems
sure.
to me,
So
moving forward, we already know. Well, I'm not trying to adjudicate those two. I know we're not
let's
talking about that.
avoid that
I'm-
at all
yes,
costs,
I'm
yeah.
not doing that. But if that's what we decided, is that ultimately these are really for the low and moderate contributors, then that's the bar. I mean, there's a bar. We need to figure out what that bar is.
No, low integrity generally means you're not a contributor.
Right.
Contributors,
All right, so I'm getting
more
caught
or
up on
less
the
by
semantics.
definition, are moderate and
Made
high
a slide
integrity.
of the semantics of the actual names, but I think you understand what I'm saying in spirit. There's
no, I'm
the
just-
barely
I'm letting you
contributors.
know, so.
There's I could see them as easily a contributor, and then there's ones that are obviously contributors. So we're talking about maybe the ones you drive by and go, that one's a contributor. That's pretty good.
That's another issue that was raised at our previous discussion, and council has raised this. And I have to treat every contributor the same, whether it's a modest minimal traditional house or the highest end Spanish colonial. And that's just how it works.
Except that you just told us that we as a group could say, well, this house, because it's so big and grand and so wonderful on the street, but maybe doesn't need as much work as this small little house that doesn't necessarily have the presence.
I didn't talk about size. It could be the small little house is going to give you that wow factor that brings it back to something.
That's not, you're
jump
not
in for a
understanding what I'm
minute?
getting at.
I'm sorry.
You said that there was an opportunity for us to decide a lower pointed house versus a higher pointed house because the lower pointed house maybe had a different experience for people. So that's where I'm getting kind of stuck on, is that's a very subjective position. And I can't understand how we're going to operate in this situation if we have this.
I have a suggestion. No, that's okay. Because I heard it exactly the same way that you did, but I rejoiced because I do think that there should be. I just hate the idea of a process where there's really zero room for commissioner discretion. And I think part of the bang for the buck isn't just the money that someone throws at a house, but the idea if it's a corner house, or if it has like a particularly visible place within the neighborhood, I think it's good that we could take that into account. I also like the idea of taking into account the fact that a minimal traditional homeowner would want to come forward and apply for the Mills Act. How many minimal traditionals are on the Glendale Register? 0, which means that 0 will be preserved at a high integrity or restored to a high integrity level. So if there's room for us to have a moderate amount of discretion and subjectivity, I think that's great. And I think as a commission that we should embrace that. That, I think, does not mean jettisoning the point system, because it's also good to have the numbers involved so we can weigh all of the factors. And I would compare it to a controversy and conversation that's near and dear to my heart as a professor, the role of the SATs in admission. Like, SATs give you valuable information, but it's insufficient on its own. Or GPA, like you want the kind of holistic portion. And I think that our decisions would largely be driven by the data in part because I think that's what council would most respond to is a number. But I do think it's excellent if we can, just have a little bit of discretion to recognize that some, because of, a position of a house within a neighborhood, that it might have a high value that we would want to acknowledge in some way.
And let's also remember, this is an advisory determination. Council is ultimately going to look at it. I think Kathy's right that they may look at the numbers a little harder, possibly. But the homeowner will have that opportunity and say, what the hell? Yeah, I'm number 1, but they're recommending giving it to number 4. I don't get it. And then council will start thinking about that, and they get to make the hard decision. So I don't see a downside to.
I just don't know if we live in that world anymore. You mentioned that council doesn't want you that you have to treat everyone equitably and all of that.
That's my personal, professional practice. It's council's never weighed in on that.
I guess your point is that despite the fact that we might be evaluating properties on a more ethereal, sort of subjective way, that in itself is still equal.
Well, it's also, I think it's subjective, but it's not evidence-free. I mean, we would make a case for why, we would, provide evidence for why we held the opinion that we did, that would lead us perhaps to prioritize a property that may have a lower score. Like, if there's like a huge gap, I find it hard to believe that we would, you'd make up for a huge deficit in points and numbers.
Yeah. I mean, I get that.
But if it's a small one, I think that we need to make the case, just as we always want to make findings for our recommendations, and I think that would be a finding that we would need to make.
The other concern I have that Jay mentioned, thank you, that totally made sense, Jay, that you mentioned, you talked about, and I did correct my position, but you mentioned this floating threshold every year. Problem I have with that is, or the concern I have with that is that you mentioned that, we don't have to recommend any properties to get one of these contracts. But to my point, that's why I feel like there also should be a bar, because if there's some sort of, if we're just looking at two, like I mentioned before, this year that have, they both float around this area of need in terms of points. And then the next year, we have ones that are much higher. It will become, to me, it would be hard the next year to decide that suddenly two lower ones again deserve it. How low will we go? Can we just go as low as we want every year? Because we can. It's to your point. We don't have to do it. We can do it, but if it's a program that's there, it would be great to do it, but I don't necessarily want to do it just because we can, and just because if we've got a couple of houses that are like, well, they're all we got this year, and their numbers may not be great, but hey, let's pass them on. Well, we don't know that, right? We don't know that we wouldn't do that. I mean, we don't know until we see them in front of us, so I feel like since we can't treat this the same as the Glendale Register process, which I also think probably could be modified a little bit, taking some of the stuff from here, maybe. I think that might be something that we talk about, but if we, I don't know. I guess I've said it enough.
Well,
I do think there needs to be if we're going to use a point system, there needs to be some kind of a minimum.
Yeah, and let me just throw out, I cannot right now think what that would be. After 3 years of experience with this program, maybe we'll start seeing some numbers. We'll have some experience with this, and maybe we could establish that. And I don't inherently have a problem with it, the concept. I just don't know what it would be right now. It would be really hard for me to do that.
I also
Can I chime in?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner Paul, please.
Okay. Just a couple of things in terms of what has been getting said here. This point system and a minimum threshold and objectivity and subjectivity. I have a couple of things to say around this. I think my understanding in looking at the past videos and what my latest understanding was, at least before this meeting, was that there's a threshold number that could be subject to change in the future per year of 4 GR properties and 2 contributors. Where does that threshold stand right now, Jay?
Last year, we did 4 Glendale registers. Just coincidentally, we didn't stop anyone from going. And in general, when we have additional staff time, we've handled, I think, 8 or 9 in a year in the past.
Or Mills Act of GRs?
But that's for Glendale Register and Mills Act, so.
I'm talking about just the Mills Act.
Yeah, we had 4 Mills Act contracts signed last year. We actually signed a 5th last year, but that was from the previous year's round. The owner had a circumstance they couldn't sign it in 2022, so they signed 2023.
Okay, so let's just assume for now, and this could change in the future, but let's assume for now the possibility of 2 contributors receiving a Mills Act, in terms of the number. I'm not thinking about any 2 particular properties in particular, just the number. If they're getting a tax savings, and if they have items on their, that need work, that are getting points, I don't see why we would not I don't see why we wouldn't award them a Mills Act contract if they're getting a tax savings, even if it's not a big one, and we've awarded them points in some capacity for the work that they want to do. Then hypothetically they should, if they get a tax savings and they want to commit to this for 10 years. Now, I could see it a case in the future where there's 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 contributors applying a year. And certainly then I think the ranking system becomes much more crucial, because presumably there's not going to be staff to award all 12 of them a Mills Act contract, and there may not be that will at city council to do so. In terms of subjectivity, I want to touch on something Jay said that I think could be helpful. I hope. Jay, you talked a little bit a while ago about the wow factor of a certain house, and I understand how we went on a certain direction about that being subjective, but maybe in terms of the possibility of a wow factor, maybe thinking about what that wow factor could be used to sort of refine this point system. Presumably, it's a house with a good highly visible right of way, or a corner house. So that maybe there's a way to take what we conceptually call a wow factor now and refine the point system with that to articulate the point system better, so it doesn't seem so subjective. And also, finally, in terms of subjectivity, I think I go back to something Commissioner Yurka said. Because we're qualified professionals in this, I think it's okay to have an expert opinion. I don't think that's necessarily subjective. I think we're providing informed opinions, as is staff. So all of those things taken together, in my mind, are still, supporting this point system, seeing the need for it, especially down the road when there's a lot of contributor applications, and refining the point system so that the wow factor is just not something that comes out of nowhere, but maybe there's a way to better refine the point system in terms of what those wow factors could potentially be, and to equivocate them to points.
I've never been asked to quantify wow. Not sure what that would be. We do, if you look at the chart that's up on the screen now, or it could be up on the screen now, we do add a half a point to work items that are visible from the street, giving a little priority to the things that we can assume give us a more public benefit.
Yeah,
And that has a little bit of wow built into that. And I think, subjectivity is part of a lot of what we do. The state is trying to take that away from us. I don't know how that's going to work in some cases.
Here's the deal. I have one more point on this point, so to speak. I didn't mean that as a pun. But what I'm worried about, if we did not have something like a point system, I guess what I'm concerned about is if it was just based on cost, if it got really competitive, I mean, wouldn't there conceivably be a situation where if somebody really wanted this Mills Act, they could purposely find somebody to give them a cost estimate that's super duper high and sort of manipulate that variable so that that's not subjective either?
Well, that's why we're going to bring this to our building and safety staff, who have experience reviewing permit applications all the time that have a project valuation on them, because permit costs are tied to valuation in many cases, and they're pretty good about recognizing the normal range versus the abnormal. So
Okay, thank
you're
you.
right, that could happen, but we have a brake system there that may work partly. I don't know if it'll work completely, so.
Okay. Catherine, your finger's hovering.
Oh, no.
You're good? Okay, so we should come, do you have anything to say about the point system? I watched the tape, you were pretty in favor of it last time.
I've got nothing to change my mind. I heard nothing
Okay.
to change my mind.
And
So-
let's remember, it's not just a point system. The point system factors into this other calculation that we've got.
Okay.
So
Let's
it's kind of
Stick
combined.
on the point system for a second,
course,
since we
yeah.
have it, and we all seem to be in favor of its presence. I'm not saying we shouldn't have it, certainly, and I think everyone's in agreement of what we have. Should we talk about the specific categories, just right there on that list? Maybe
Yeah,
we
if
go one
anything's
by one.
missing, or
What
if
do
you think
is
the
important?
points are out of whack, let's definitely talk about that.
Okay.
Can I talk about one category that came up in a past meeting really quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Jay, I don't remember if it was the 2020 meeting or the 2022 meeting, but there was an issue that came up where it seemed to imply that if there was an issue around maintenance that would be anticipated, that either no points were awarded or the points might be lower. I would encourage kind of a revisiting of this, because there are a lot of items that could be common maintenance, and if they could involve altering a lot of character defining features, if somebody is trying to save a buck or doesn't have the money to do it in the ideal historic way, that the Mills Act may help them supplement with, In other words, there are all kinds of regular maintenance things, either outside of a building or even within a building, that could hypothetically affect important character defining features. So just because it could be a regular maintenance item, I don't think that means it should necessarily be ignored in terms of giving it importance. I think the issue here should be, how likely is it to affect an important character defining feature, or or the flip side of this, another way to look at it is, how much could a Mills potentially help either save an important character defining feature or bring one back, regardless of if this is considered regular maintenance that other people would have to replace on their non-historic properties or not.
Yeah, I'm having trouble picturing what that regular maintenance would be. That, when I put this together, all properties in Glendale, all properties in the world require maintenance. And if we're trying to say, why is this property special? Why does this property deserve the loss of public money so that they can do something special with their property? I think that's a high bar that we have to justify why we're doing it. And the Mills Act has all kinds of economic justice issues just as a program in general. We're not going to talk about that. But
I mean, we're only doing it for
I just wonder, for example, everyone who has wood windows needs to paint those wood windows. I don't think that we should be, and that applies to non-contributors as well as contributors. It applies to non-historic district properties. I don't know why we would say that the cost of window painting would be something we would consider here. We did the same thing with roof replacement. We heard an argument that maybe certain types of roofs would look better with a certain level of upgrade. Again, if we're not mandating those kinds of roofs be used for throughout the historic district, I'm not sure that that justifies that expense. So I very deliberately took ongoing maintenance out of the equation to think, and then when things do come up affecting historic features, if someone came and said, "Oh God, I've got my, well, I don't know, I need to replace my windows," and what if I got the Mills Act and then I could put in wood windows instead of one of the other types of windows that might be approved in a historic district? Well, I think that would make it a good candidate, and that's why we have window replacement in this equation somewhere, I think.
Features, I think is what it is. You have restore, replace, missing, deteriorated features, I'm guessing.
Commissioner Paul, I think that the thing that we have to keep in mind,
I called it sash instead of windows.
yeah,
so.
the thing we have to keep in mind is that these are district contributing homes already. So, like if we were talking about a roof, they're limited in some cases to what kind of a roof they can replace it with. So, the long-term maintenance thing, as an initial part of the point chart, I can understand where Jay's coming from, having it not be a part of that, because these homes are already protected in that regard. We don't really have, provided they're following all the steps and getting their permits, we don't have to worry about someone using a homeowner using an inappropriate material or something down the line. And the Mills Act, the Mills Act covers that's what the purpose of the Mills Act is to help with those potentially higher cost maintenance items to begin with. So I don't know, I see what you're getting at, but I feel like it's really should be about the time and place of the home at the time that we're reviewing it and what's there.
Daniel, did you have an example in mind?
Well, I'm just thinking, I was thinking about roofs, honestly, at the time, because a roof, it could be expensive. And there's a lot, I feel like, in maybe not just with Glendale, but just my experience, contributing buildings in districts tend to get, it feels like they get a little more flexibility, which could run both ways. I think that sometimes it's necessary because a property owner can only maybe afford so much. But I also feel like I would ideally, maybe this is very ideal, but I think ideally I would like to see the Mills Act for contributors used for almost like a form of best practices, where if a Mills Act savings, for example, with a roof, if a Mills Act if we know the roof is going to need to be replaced within the next 10 years or so, and a Mills Act savings could be used to really put a period appropriate roof on there, as opposed to one that's perfunctory for the district. I would like to see the really right product on there, as opposed to the perfunctory one just for the sake of getting, like, oh, this is good enough for the district. I would almost I'm just curious about a best practices approach. And in terms of I think what Jay, I don't remember the term, but like the public good or whatnot, I mean, these are all these are historical resources, so there's already something special about them. That's the whole purpose of the Mills Act. So I'm just trying to think of the best possible way to use the Mills Act to bring back the absolute best possible character defining features for a house. And sometimes the choice of going down one path or another may come up in a maintenance situation. That's all.
I wanted to say, Daniel, that I agree with Jay about painting and maybe other maintenance features. I completely agree with you about a roof replacement that would be more appropriate to the historic character of the property. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they would be expected to get credit for the entire cost of replacement, but certain materials can be more expensive as part of a roof repair, not just the cost of the materials, but the labor involved as well. And I agree that should be something that someone could make a case for as part of a Mills Act work plan.
To address that, do you think establishing a percentage of roof costs, and I don't know what that would be, but if we said you can put 50 or 70% of your roof costs as an applicable work plan cost, that might help balance out the fact that everyone has to replace their roof every 20, 30, 40 years, whatever.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Now, one thing I just want to throw out, and this is something I just learned from a roofing expert who I trust. We have over the years tried to lead people towards fake shake alternatives. Almost all of those are so highly problematic or aren't available in our region that basically his recommendation there's a product called Cedar, there's several companies that make these roof tiles, failure. They look good on the surface, and that's why brochure looks nice, and we've said, oh yeah, go ahead and use this. We try to give people, I'm not going to tell someone you can't install that. It's kind of buyer beware. But I'll let people know in the future that this is an issue. But I think it's going to be very hard. Like, I'm trying to think, Spanish is easy. We can get Spanish tiles made if someone needs to put new tiles up there. Many houses had wood shake roofs originally and went to asphalt shingles, although asphalt shingles were in use during the period of all of our houses in all of our historic districts. So, and there are better asphalt shingles than others, and there's a cost differential there. I'm not sure what we would be guiding people toward, but I think if we have that provision that, if we feel it's going, because I would not want to give someone a tax break for putting a material that is not going to last. And according to this guy, some of the materials are failing within the first 5 years.
So many of those have been recalled from, the ones that people came up with 25 years ago that were made of composite materials. They all have recalls on them now, and they cause problems when people go to sell their house because it's like, well, this house gets to get re-roofed. So in a situation where we're looking at two houses, one that originally had a wood shake roof on it that has now composition, and a Spanish-style house that has a triple tile roof on it, they're both going to need to be re-roofed at some point. Would we be saying to the triple tile roof house that when you go to re-roof your house, you've got to use these tiles as best you can to keep it triple tile? You can't do this new modern thing that everybody does.
I think that's fair because we're treating these houses like Glendale Register properties.
So then do we provide them the break?
Mm-hmm.
As
and,
well?
and
So
maybe we still have a
credit.
differential in the cost.
So who wouldn't get the roof credit in that case?
Well, if someone has an asphalt shingle roof on a minimal traditional house,
that was originally wood shake.
Not necessarily.
Mine was originally wood shake.
Yeah.
So if mine, and we may not know if it was originally wood
We
shake.
very likely won't know. That's why roofs were tricky, and that's why I thought, it's probably one of the, if not the most expensive repair costs that any homeowner is going to have over time, as far as one item. And since it's a burden shared by every single property owner, I was very wary of including it. If you want to do that, I'm not going to fight that if that's the decision of the commission.
We're going to talk about roofs. I think sorry to interrupt, but I think one potential way to look at it is whether a house's roof needs to completely come off and be put back on. For the instance, I bought my house. It was the original wood shake roof underneath 2 layers of composition. I had to strip the thing clean. You could see the sky from the attic. That was far more costly than just having the opportunity to put another layer down or even just strip the shingles that were there and put them on already wood sheathing. So maybe if we are going to talk about something like that, a potential longer term maintenance item or replacement item, maybe we approach it as, is this a full roof replacement that has to come completely off and has to start over? Because that's certainly far more costly than a roof that just happens to have the wrong material on top of an otherwise perfectly fine roof. I think that's the only way I would feel comfortable using roofs. Here we are adding a category. Putting roofs on as a category would be, what will the eventual extent of the work be? So that's my thoughts on that.
That certainly makes sense if we're going to do this. That combined, we still might want to have a price, a percentage differential.
Yeah.
And
how much life it has, maybe, or something.
Yeah, because if someone's just laying new asphalt over existing asphalt, they're not touching the deck, they're not doing any of the stuff that sends the price
It's not
up.
nothing, but it's not it doesn't, it doesn't fall into the history.
So we could,
do you think about
we
that,
could, we could
Commissioner
write up
Paul?
a definition, major roof work versus minor roof work / maintenance, and I could run that by you guys.
So then for the folks that maybe have, who maybe have who have a Spanish, who have maybe that sort of modern Spanish tile that's like double tile or single tile, whatever.
L-style, yeah.
that new version. And they come to us and say, well, when we redo our roof, we would like to put it back to triple tile. We want to go old school. That's certainly going to be a lot more costly. Is that then something we would want to consider? But the problem with that is
That would fall under major roof replacement as I'm picturing it as we speak.
And then the problem I have with that is, and I'm sure the process is in place, but if that roof replacement doesn't come for 10 years and on year 8 these people sell their house, this is where my realtor hat comes on. Having to pass on all of this stuff to the next homeowner becomes tricky and requires, and I could see the potential of this becoming a problem.
It happens with our Glendale Register conditions several times. It's happened.
It does. This
We've
is a
been
little bit
burned
different.
once, and that's an
Yes.
ongoing issue.
It does, but this is even a little bit different because we're talking about something that's really super long-term. Our conditions are usually 4 or 5 years out.
We
They're a
also
little bit
we
easier to
asked for
manage.
a timeline for the work plan for the Mills Act. If someone said, "I'm going to replace my roof in 12 years," you might say, "Sorry, we want to see this work sooner."
Okay, so that's
And
important to
that's-
know. If we think your roof is going to need to be, or you think your roof is going, or you're committing to replacing your roof, whether it needs it or not, in 5 years, then we'll give you the credit. Otherwise, we're not going to give you the points for
And
it.
if they come back to me in 5 years and say, "Hey, we really can't do this right now," similar to the windows that we reviewed on the house on Angeles, we could bring it back to the commission, and you could, it's hard. The city cannot renew contracts. It's hard to cancel a contract. That's a real major step with a major financial penalty. So we want to reserve that for people who are clear scofflaws.
Yeah.
But if you, I never remember you love that word, yeah. So if we want to do that, for less clear-cut situations, I guess.
So we could have that, someone brought before the commission again
I would-
at
I
some
would-
point,
I would-
and we
I
could
would-
say,
I
we
would
recommend to the council that they not renew this
Yeah,
contract.
and if the person comes and says, "Oh, yes, I'll do whatever you say," and then they still don't do it, our recourse is ultimately probably non-renewal rather than cancellation.
Never
but
done that, right?
We've never done it, no. And the owners can also do it. It's a two-way street,
Okay.
but no one does it.
So where do we stand on roofs? Are we adding it? If so, how? Do you have a thought on that, Mr. Jim?
I like what Jay said, major and minor or in maintenance work to determine the 3 criteria for a roof.
And then there should be a time element too, right?
Well, each work item is going to have a
An
timeline,
individual time element,
so.
yeah.
No, I understand on when we say it has to be done. So, but what if the homeowner says, well, I'm not going to do it in 5 years. I'm going to do it in 10 years. We then remove it.
Then you may discount that work item and we could rescore
This is where we
in
got hung
real
up
time.
last
We could
time.
redo the score in real time at a hearing
I
if
mean,
you
that's what we're
needed.
going to have to do is you might have to have your Excel spreadsheet open and we're just working at it, because that was what was hard for us at that meeting. I remember was that we had made some changes and I was like, well now what's the whole, what are the points now? What's the score? We kind of lost track of that. And if we're having to give an answer that night, I mean, I think in the spirit of due diligence, we have to be able to know exactly what we're.
That shouldn't be a problem. So I'm hearing major and minor roof repairs. I'll try to create a definition for that. I don't want to hold up bringing the 2 applicants back, so I'll present that at the hearing if we're cool with it, or we can tweak it at the hearing if we need to. And then I'll also think about the cost differential, and if you have any recommendations, please share them tonight.
You mean like percentage of, is that what you mean, cost differential?
Yeah, if someone has a $100,000 roof job and it's a major job, but we want to have some parity with the houses that are, don't have that level of work, but still have to replace their roof for $30,000.
So I guess in this case, to Commissioner Paul's point, it sounded like his request, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was more about looking farther down the road at this potential maintenance item. I don't necessarily see, unless you're saying that even if it's long-term, the homeowner has to bring us an estimate for it because we need the hard numbers, right?
I'm saying I would recommend that we not have, everyone has to replace their roof depending on when it was installed. If someone just had a 40-year roof put on their house and they come to us and say, I'd like a Mills Act contract, and as part of my evaluation and my work plan, I'm going to replace my roof in 40 years, I think it's well within the commission's scope to say, we're not going to consider that. We're going to cross that one off your work
What if it's
list.
a homeowner that bought the house recently and the previous owner had just put it on 2 years ago and the roof is in fine shape, but it's maybe they want to use a material that maybe if they bought a house that had the single tile roof and they're like, we really want a triple tile roof.
Right,
And-
if we're doing restorative work,
but it doesn't need it. So this also came up was that it-
there's the idea of throwing away a brand new roof, which is not the greatest thing in the world, but there's also the idea of like, do we want to wait 30 years for that roof to expire? And
So I feel like in that
I think
case-
I think that person just may be out of luck on their roof.
that's what I mean. I feel like that roof shouldn't be included at that point because it's too new and
Yeah,
that's
and
just the way
I
it goes.
I think through your deliberation, you're going to be able to weed these things out.
Yeah.
So I don't think it needs to be built in here. So.
I brought up
But just the
comment.
example, Daniel, one quick second then. Just saying the $20,000 or $30,000 roof versus the $100,000 roof, that suggests that maybe, because I think a modest house, 1,500 square foot house is probably going to be $20,000, $25,000 for a simple new roof. So maybe the 75% differential might be something to consider.
Commissioner Paul, did you have something you wanted to say on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I brought it up assuming that there would be a need to, my original reason for bringing up the roof was that there would be a need within the lifespan of 10 years. So it's on whatever owner decides to go into a Mills Act contract, it's on them to think, from one, I mean, obviously we, staff or us will, somebody else tweaks the timeline, but it's on them to think about, 1 to 10, that's the life of the contract. I had brought this up thinking that there would be a need to replace a roof between year 1 and year 10. The idea of having a really nice roof and it's not the ideal roof, I think as Jay mentioned, yeah, that person would probably be out of luck, or that would just rank so low in terms of, importance or, ranking or whatever in terms of other items, that it would almost be inconsequential. And I don't think that would be a good, for the public benefit. But that's why I brought it up. I assumed a need when I brought
Like a
it
more
up.
immediate
And
need.
to get to
Sooner
what
need.
to get to what Jay just said, I think a good percentage might be, and I don't know how much roofs cost, but whatever like a passable roof for a contributor in a district would be versus the ideal roof. And I don't know what those numbers are, but that's it.
I guess the problem I have with this, just a blanket 75% differential or whatever, to me, it should be based on really the ultimate cost has more, the part that we care about is the material really is ultimately what we care about. The fact that someone has to rip their roof off like I was describing and start from scratch, they have to do that anyway. It seems to me it should be more centered around the fact that if they want to, if to bring it more in line with its historic nature, this particular material costs more. I feel like 75% of the cost of a roof is not related to the material, it's the labor. I think the material cost is probably, I don't know, let's say it's 25%. I feel like if we're going to be giving a benefit for a roof replacement so that that roof, and when that happens, the roof becomes more in line with its characteristics that were associated with it when it was built. I don't know how that came out. I feel like it should be based on the material, not on the fact of, not the total cost of the roof, but on what we think the material portion of that is.
Okay, I
Because if they decide to put the same material on it, then why are we giving them any credit for it at all?
We wouldn't presume.
Right.
that would be your choice.
So I would, because we can be arbitrary, I'm going to suggest 50% because I think that the cost is not only material, because some materials involve different kinds of labor. And
I mean, I understand where you're coming from on that,
So
yeah.
I just think maybe this doesn't have to be an exact science.
Right.
I think so.
And it can be changed over time if we realize
Yeah.
it's not working. I just went back to the staff report from 2020, from the August meeting, where we kind of went over this. And in one paragraph, I'm explaining specifically why I recommended that we exclude painting and roof work. I left in that we would allow for roof work to be included in cases of significant deterioration. Based on what Chris has been discussing, I would add to that restorative work, where maybe we are sending stuff to the landfill, but one of the goals of historic districts is incrementally to bring properties closer to their historic appearance. So that would be one way to select, and then maybe major, minor isn't an issue then, and we can just say, if you're deteriorated today, yes. Or if you're restoring your house in a way that we can document is appropriate and meaningful, yeah. Does that sound like an idea?
Sounds great to me.
And then we don't have to define major and minor, is that? Because I wasn't looking forward to that. Okay.
Also say not necessarily interior. I mean, I think there's also a possibility that some roofs could be toward the end of their life and would need to be replaced within the lifespan of the Mills Act contract. So there may not be something that's, level 5 emergency today, but there's a high likelihood, and if you run it by building and safety or whatever and get a second, that it will need to be replaced within the lifespan of the contract.
Well,
that
the
it's
lifespan
done
of the
right.
contract is theoretically infinite, so
10
that,
years.
Well, no, it's not, because it renews every year, Commissioner Paul, so it really is in perpetuity. It's a 10-year contract, but every year it renews, so it's always a 10-year contract.
right. There are some cities that just grant it for 10 years. We're not one of those cities, so.
Let it go on and on and on. So it's,
Got it.
yeah. So, okay, so it sounds like we've got roofs covered.
While I have this document open, it reminded me, we're very focused on these points and the calculation and stuff. If I remember correctly, we had talked about some of the requirements for the application, one of which was a termite report and one of which was a building inspection report. And if I remember correctly, I had recommended a 5-year cyclical round of those. And I believe that the commission thought 10 years was more appropriate. And I can't remember if that was for both of them or not.
So, go ahead.
There was some disagreement about whether or not there should be a termite report and a house inspection on a regular basis. And I at minimum, I think a termite report is a good idea. I could go either way on the house inspection. And the reason why I think the termite report, and I think this could also apply to existing Mills Act properties, is that sometimes a homeowner doesn't know that there's damage. And if there is damage, it could affect the exterior. And I think that would just be very helpful for homeowners. And it's not inexpensive. It's the cost of having the Mills Act.
I was going to add that I do agree with that, and I would say that a termite report should also be submitted when people apply for Glendale Register Mills
Yeah,
Act contracts.
That's,
A previous commission, before any of you were on the commission, that was talked about, but no one brought it to council, and we didn't kind of go over that again. So I think it's a fine idea.
I think before we decide what reports, if any, should be acquired, I think we should really talk about what elements we're going to have on this point system, because it may be determined that we don't need a home inspection, because we're not going to be talking about a lot of the stuff that comes up in a home inspection, because we've decided that everything is going to be what we can see in on the exterior, and we're not going to be caring about what.
Well, let me from personal experience. I recently, crazy what we just did, but we had a leaking shower pan. That was in the middle of our house. There were some structural joists that were affected and had to be beefed up, nothing major. Were the shower pan to have been on the side of the, on the exterior wall of the house, and say we're an old Craftsman with a brick foundation, that water leaking on the brick foundation is going to lead to structural deterioration of the foundation, which is one of the structural concerns that we have. I would still recommend, but you're going to tell me what you want to do, but I would recommend a building inspection at application. If we never do another one, maybe that's fine. Hopefully the homeowners are on top of what's going on.
So termite inspectors do look at shower pans. That's one of their purviews because it's water related. So termite inspections, just to remind everybody, it's termite and wood destroying pests, fungus, things like that. So
It was our building inspector who identified the problem.
very likely
so,
he would too. He would also, it's not like a building inspector would not look at it, but termite inspectors, they cover up the drain in your shower and they fill it up. They do a shower pan test. So that would definitely be covered in a termite inspection. So let's go back to the list. Maybe we can start at the bottom with systems and work our way up. Because I have a feeling.
Well, can we finish with restoration since we've done the roof?
Roof was kind of pulled into it.
Well, but roof is number one, roof cladding.
Right, I understand. I would, to be honest, I have a feeling a lot more restoration stuff will stay in it, and I feel like that's going to go really quick. So I'd rather, while we still have the energy, start at the bottom and work our way
Totally
up.
makes sense.
So systems, antiquated and deteriorated electrical, dangerous plumbing lines, dangerous sewage lines, special circumstances. So, so for me, this goes back to treating these properties different than we treat our Glendale Register properties. And I also think that a homeowner that has an inspection done on their property and discovers that their sewage lines are bad, their plumbing lines are bad, and their electrical is bad, regardless of whether or not they have a Mills Act contract, should and would repair these things. And there's not really anything subjective about the materials that you use for them. You put in copper plumbing, you put in ABS sewage lines, you put in, Romex wiring, whatever it is. There's not really a lot of subjectivity there. It's work that needs to be done. And I feel more like it would be if something terrible happened because one of these systems hadn't been repaired or upgraded, maybe that's grounds for the non-renewal of someone's contract because they didn't maintain their house like every homeowner should maintain their house. I don't feel like these are at all related to what we're trying to do, which is from the street, make sure these houses appear as they, historically did. So I'm in favor of just eliminating systems altogether.
So if I can, so I disagree with that because I think that the goal is preservation, and I think that replacing antiquated or dangerous electrical is hugely important. Because we don't want the house to burn down, and there are plenty of people who don't do that work. So that if we say, this is part of your work plan for this contract, I think that's something that we should actually consider doing for any Mills Act property.
Yes, and that's where I've been with that's where I'm coming at this from. And I don't know that we have. Let me ask you this. When we're done with this whole process, do we get to go back and make changes to the way Glendale Register properties are presented and approved and put all of this same stuff on them?
You can talk to your council member and ask them to raise that issue, and if two of them agree and direct staff to prepare that, sure. But you can't unilaterally change the program just through your decisions.
The policy is.
But we could, at a meeting, ask about the electrical system and add that as a condition.
Sure.
So for a Glendale Register.
If they know, there aren't a lot of knob and tube systems still out there but they exist. I've seen
they're
some.
still there.
And so it's not a big number of properties. You could certainly ask.
Yeah,
But if you want to turn that into a requirement that we have the inspection of Glendale Register properties before designation. The difference is we've always held, it would be tied to the Mills Act application, actually. So we've always held that the Glendale Register nomination should be free, but we do charge for the Mills Act application. So, I have no problem doing that, but we'd have to get direction to change it, so.
I have no problem adding it at this time for contributing properties. And same with plumbing lines. I mean, plumbing can, I mean, your example is a case in point. And, I just think that if there's antiquated plumbing, giving a point for someone who is going to make changes that will help to preserve the house and ensure that it exists into the future. And I just.
See, I totally understand where you're coming from. I totally get where you're coming from, but I think it's important that the types of things that the types of restoration and repair and thing that we're talking about be distinguished from things that other people, and we were just talking about roofs. You have to change your roof. People have to update their plumbing. They have to update their electrical. I don't know that there's rampant destruction of properties in our city because of bad wiring. I don't know of any homes that have completely burned to the ground lately because of bad wiring. It's not like the issue is because it's a problem in a way because we know it now. And I just don't think I don't feel like I just don't feel like systems related things like that should be part of the chart because that part in a way isn't fair. Just because, these properties are 100 years old, and I can tell you some systems have been updated, some haven't been updated, some have been half updated, some have been, and it's like someone gets lucky in a way, lucky that someone didn't already update their electrical. When they bought the house 5, 10, whenever years ago, they were told they had old electrical wiring. If they haven't fixed it by now, then it's not something that they think is necessary. And I don't know, I'm just having a hard time with stuff that we don't see. Our purview is stuff that we see. It's always been what we can see from the public right of way. Yeah. And getting into the weeds of telling someone how they have to update their house and into the weeds about every little minutia of systems, this chart is just so off-puttingly long that I don't think I'm going to be able to support that.
It's on one page. Could I recommend we talk to our 3 other colleagues who haven't weighed in on this?
No.
Yeah, Jeffrey's speaking.
Of course.
Your positions are clear.
So the systems are invisible. You don't see them, right? You don't really see. So as a homeowner, how would you know whether or not the systems are safe and not outdated and not going to cause some sort of problem?
No, I understand that, but that's the responsibility of every homeowner.
Yeah, but I don't know that all homeowners, whether they may be very responsible, but they also may have no clue, and that's not because they're irresponsible.
Also, presumably when they bought their house, they had a home inspection, so they're going to know. They will have been told by a professional what the condition of their wiring is. Knob and tube wiring today is no different than knob and tube wiring when they bought it 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. Property owners should know these things. They have been told these things. Right. And I don't necessarily think we should be giving, well, anyway, we know why I don't think we should give them.
So, for example, with the home inspection, on those reports, the inspector typically rates the level of priority. And I think that would be a good thing to be able to read in a home inspection report.
I'm not saying we shouldn't do the report if you guys think a report is necessary. I'm concerned about, my position is that we're talking about the point system. And we're trying to figure out what categories should be on the point system. Mm-hmm. I don't know that these particular, I think every homeowner should know, and maybe that's something we weigh, which is we're not going to get points for this kind of thing, but we see that this house has all these old systems. You really want to be spending your money on all of these exterior things when you've already got these other things that you need to do. That, by the way, every homeowner has to do. Mm-hmm. I just feel like we're starting to give value to things that everyone has to do, and we keep talking about how these properties are different.
Yeah, but there is these systems have the potential to endanger the properties.
Yeah.
That's why we included structural and systems. Structural, you usually can't see either, but that was the thought.
Yeah.
So I agree that systems should be in place to keep these homes, these properties, up to the level that we want to be preserved. These are not your normal run-of-the-mill homes. These are, run-of-the-mill, Mills Act's homes. These are the homes we want to last. And even though I got my house 15 years ago, now I'm going to put up Mills application. I want to make sure that the house we approve has been inspected and up to date, and the homeowner is now responsible and made aware of these things they need to do. So I think it should stay.
Okay.
Commissioner Paul?
Yes. Okay. So a couple things. I've done Mills Acts before in other cities, particularly Pasadena, and there was no problem with replacing elements inside a house that were either structural or systems that you could not see. It incentivized somebody who cared about preserving their house in some way to do so. So you have somebody who's there. You have somebody who wants to do preservation in some capacity. By giving them a Mills Act, that's good faith, even if that Mills Act, that if parts of that Mills Act are going towards structural or systems. Now, in this case that I'm thinking of, where the city awarded somebody to replace some stuff inside their attic. I think it was seismic walls or something like that. They also had elements on the outside of their house that they also wanted to replace. So I think keeping the systems in there is a good way to incentivize people who care about preservation. In some, you're doing it. You're helping it. You're doing a solid for somebody who wants to try to do the right thing preservation-wise, even if it starts on the inside. But what I would suggest is this: perhaps for the things you cannot see, to give those lesser points. And if somebody came to the city trying to apply, I don't really like the idea of a threshold where somebody just doesn't get one at all. But perhaps maybe if somebody just wanted to replace systems or simply wanted to replace things that nobody can see at all, maybe then they wouldn't get a Mills Act. Or the points awarded for systems would be a half a point or less than the things that you can see. But I still think that they should have some sort of presence on this list.
Okay.
Okay, we have a majority keeping systems. Are we in,
Can I
is there
ask a
agreement
question
about
before-
one? Of
can I-
course.
Sorry,
but-
really quickly. So then, remind me, this is about the system in general, the process in general. At what point does the cost of a specific repair affect the overall points? At what point does that get
It
put into
always
it?
does. Points are partially based on expense.
So it's not 1 point for the plumbing, it's
You add up the points, but then you run it through the little calculation with the ratio, the expense to, what is it? Expense to, oops, I'm on the wrong page. Hold on a second. We have this calculation of determining expense to savings ratio.
Okay. I guess, let me ask the question this way. Replacing the electrical in a house that has knob and tube wiring is very different than replacing the electrical in a house where the electrical is in conduit. Both of them have old cloth wires that need to go because they're dangerous. But the ones in conduit are far easier to replace because they can just fish a line through and pull new wire, whereas with knob and tube, they've got to open up the walls, and it's a huge process.
No, well, I've seen abandoned knob and tube all the time where you just run new electrical and you
You
just.
understand when you run new electrical, you're putting holes in the wall to run the electrical. See, with conduit, there's a
Yeah,
pipe.
no, I'm very familiar
Right, so
with
there's
how
a
that
difference.
works.
There's a difference in the cost, right?
The conduit's attached to the studs usually. You can't just go up in the attic and pull it up, so.
No, so a conduit is a pipe, and
I'm
inside
familiar
the
with
pipe
what
is
a
a wire.
conduit is.
So you go to one end, you fish a line through the pipe to one end, you hook a new wire on it, and you pull it through to the fixture. You don't open up any walls at all.
And if it's flexible conduit, you can't do that. And
Okay, so the houses in the 20s and 30s were not, and 40s that have conduit were hard, rigid conduit. Different than the ones based on all the many
Apologize,
reports. So the question I have is, at what point, is there a point where a property that has knob and tube and has to have their house rewired versus a house that has rigid conduit has to be rewired, where there's a major cost differential that will get accounted for somewhere in this before we get to it, right?
the cost will be higher and.
Right, so it gets
yeah,
accounted for.
Yeah,
We don't,
definitely.
what I mean is, I don't need to ask, can a house with rigid conduit be 1 point and a house with knob and tube be 2 points? I don't need to do that.
You're the one
because
who hates the length of that list, so I don't think
I
we
really
should.
do. But
I
if
don't
we're
want
going
to
to
go
do it,
there.
I want to make sure it's done appropriately.
It'll
It comes out in the
come
ultimate
out through the
estimates.
calculation, yeah.
Okay. All right.
I would just suggest that we not have anything less than a point. I mean, I think for simplicity's sake, so.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, it would be like 1 point or 2 points or whatever, yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay, let's go back to that slide. Okay, structural.
Okay, so we've got repair foundation major, repair failing structural members, seismic retrofit, rebuild damaged missing chimney, repair, replace wood with extensive termite dry rot damage. The only comment I would have about seismic retrofit is that the state does offer grants that help pay for people's seismic retrofit. So there are money-saving costs involved in seismic retrofits.
And need-based or universal?
I believe it's pretty universal. There's an application process that happens every year. It's not, everybody doesn't get it. You have to, get your application.
It's a competitive process.
Sorry, it's a first come, first serve. It's a first come, first serve, your least favorite thing. It's a first come, first serve, and they run out of it every year, and then you start over again. So there are other places where homeowners can save money on a seismic retrofit, but if everyone is inclined to keep it in place, then I suppose it should stay in place. And those people can get it through the Mills Act and save the grant for someone else.
What about the possibility of prioritizing things here that, to go back to what can be seen versus not, it seems like some of these things are readily visible from the public right away, whereas some of them are not. Is there any thoughts on prioritizing items that could be readily seen from the public right of way?
Yeah, a chimney replacement would get 1.5 points. Anything that's visible gets an extra half point.
Okay.
Now, the one thing I haven't thought through much is if I think I was picturing that half point being tacked on to whatever the total points is. If you're replacing 10 windows, I don't think you're going to get 5 extra points because those 10 are visible, unless you guys disagree. I don't remember where my brain was when I put this
I
together.
think that would probably just be where the cost estimate comes in to affect the overall score, right? Replacing 10 windows is more than 5
you're
windows.
getting an extra point for a larger number of things, and then if those are visible, you're getting an extra half point, so.
And that's, I think, also where we, as a body, could say, look at the impact this is going to have from the streets, whether or not it's recorded in the SAT.
As long as they've got the extracurricular activities to back it up.
What about, Jay, I don't know if your system accommodates for, and I like most of the system, actually. I think it's really thought out, but what about if there's something that's on the outside of the house, but that's not viewable from the street? That's not totally internal or hidden like systems.
Well, for structural we're talking about, or systems?
It's for structural, so like side and rear elevations. It's a character defining feature of the house. It's not totally invisible. So like for structure, so like let's say you had a chimney that's definitely on the outside of the house, but it's not readily visible from the public right away. Maybe because there's like I don't know, there could be a lot of reasons for that. Let's say it's in a back elevation.
Yeah, you just don't get that extra half point.
Yeah, you get the 1 point. If it were in the front of the house or on the side of the house, you get an extra half point.
I see. Okay.
And
what about
please,
something? Talk about
this list is not definitive. If you think of things that you've done at your own places or in general, we can add to this list, I hate to say.
this is good. I mean, we're going
Sorry,
through
go ahead,
this right
Mr.
now.
Paul, Commissioner Paul, we start again for us.
Okay, sorry about that. So I think I was just going to say failing structural members, could that be exterior also, like an extended beam, or is that assumed to be completely inside the house?
It could be either, and then you get the extra half point. We had, for example, a property, Glendale Register nomination that had, it was a post and beam house. There was a large header across the garage, the carport opening that was visibly sagging. We made that a Mills Act condition to replace. That would be an example of something that would get 1.5 points, visible plus, it was holding up one of the rooms of the house. So it was vital that be strong.
Okay. Would anyone like to add anything to the structural section?
Yes, I'm having visions of Desiree dancing through my mind about walls and driveways, pavers and cement, and connecting walls and
Interesting,
structural
yeah,
walls.
that could be in the restoration, I think.
watching, I remember it well.
To remove inappropriate driveways or walkways, or just inappropriate, we'll just call it inappropriate hardscape.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add to the restoration.
And when you see that condition or that point, you can think of me going, pavers. And Desiree.
Okay, so,
That too.
so really quick, just so we can wrap up structural, we're all good with structural. Okay, so now we're under restoration, we've added,
We're adding
Hardscape.
Restoration of inappropriate hardscape areas, which will generally mean concrete, maybe some Hollywood driveways sometimes. We may not know what to do there, so we may err on the side of a very simple treatment of just concrete with square flags and be done with it, so.
okay, so here's what we have under restoration. Replace inappropriate, highly deteriorated roof cladding, replace inappropriate, highly deteriorated wall cladding, replace inappropriate sash, repair deteriorated sash, replace severely deteriorated sash in kind, replace inappropriate door, replace inappropriate garage door, replace severely deteriorated masonry, replace missing deteriorated features. On masonry, can we add painted masonry to that?
To remove the paint?
Which could potentially mean having to replace the brick if the paint can't be properly removed.
Generally, we preservationists have lots of great ways to take stuff off of masonry, so.
I had someone come to my house to try it, and it was not successful.
It's hard, and
It
you
was
may
the
have,
company that was referred to by the people that should know. It was a very they're historic brick people, and they tried, and there's so many layers that
well, I think that would fit in. I don't think we have to
I
change
think-
anything. I think that would fit in there, so.
replace severely deteriorated masonry. Is that what that's called?
Or it could be, or how about restore, replace missing deteriorated / altered features?
Yeah, severely
Altered
deteriorated
masonry.
/ altered masonry.
Or
Yes.
masonry or features, and features, maybe it should be for both.
Masonry and features
/ altered / altered.
for both of the last two.
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so under add altered to the masonry and features items.
I'd like to add gates and fences to that.
From personal experience.
That's
I have one more feature for that. What do you say?
Had that one.
I was thinking that too, gates and fences.
Does features also include lighting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Features is a pretty broad word in my world.
I guess it could have included the driveway and the gates and everything too, but it's probably better that
I think calling that out's a good idea, so. So, Nick, you're saying, tell me again? Sorry.
Should lighting be separate or just included as a
No,
feature?
lighting, I think we can cover as features.
Okay.
Jeffrey
his
said
was the
fences, sorry,
and
it's
gates.
Jeffrey, fences and gates. Which I think are features. Do you think we need to, in the effort to keep this from going crazy?
Let's just go on with it.
Yeah,
Just
no,
kidding.
restore it.
Let's make it as
I'm
long. Let's make
channeling
it 2
you,
pages.
Chris.
Let's make it 2 pages. No, I mean, I think honestly, fences and gates kind of are. Features, to me, features means like character-defining features, and I don't know
Yeah,
that gates and fences aren't really character-defining features.
they can be,
Is that what you
totally.
meant by features?
But they're visible.
No, they are. I agree. I feel like they should be separate categories. He's thinking they could be lumped in with just the general category of features.
I think we could, all of these things
Maybe
ultimately
gates,
are
driveways,
character-defining
fences,
features, but,
Driveways, fences, gates, all that could be one, or do they need to be separated?
well, it's easier to just say hardscape, which covers all of the flat work, and then gates and fences and walls we should include.
Yeah, walls.
So I'm fine adding.
Yeah, let's just add it all. You might have to get a smaller font, Jay.
Fences. This is not crazy. When I look at this, I'm like, this is easy to look at. So fences, walls, gates, and for severe restore, replace, missing, deteriorated, so. Okay.
I have two things that are really, really outside the box, and I
Oh.
think I know the answer to them already.
Bring it on.
And but I want to ask about them because a part of me is just really curious. Number one, if there's landscape elements, like let's say there was an old house and we knew that historically it had a canary palm, but it doesn't have a canary palm now. Is there any possibility, conceivably, to use a Mills Act to replace missing historic landscape elements?
Well, I think it's going to be rare that we know about them. I think what we try to do with our surveys for districts is identify, obviously protected trees are a given citywide, but we have had, we don't have a lot of canary palms, but we have the deodar cedars that we've added to our lists of protected features in the Bellhurst survey. We asked them to try to identify any olive or citrus trees that likely dated to the period. They didn't really find any in the public viewing areas through the district, but they were looking for them. So we're aware of those as an issue, but I think it's going to be rare. Plus, the cost associated with planting a new tree is not, huge.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure we need to add that unless everyone.
Expensive though. I mean, some of those trees could be expensive. I'm not proposing we add this, but it was more out of curiosity. And the second one, which is even more ephemeral, is there any design guidance at all? I don't think there is in Glendale for the nature, when we talk about lighting, in terms of the nature of the lighting. So to avoid sort of a bright white LED light, historically, the quality of light during the periods of significance of a lot of these is not bright white light now that you have for energy saving bulbs. Is there any sort of guidance around that?
No, we
that
have
you're aware
guidance about light spillover. We're not a dark sky city, but we try, in our design review, we try to avoid uplights and keep lights down, but there are also lateral lights on the side of the house we try to shield so they're not bugging the neighbors. And then the quality of light from the bulb, LEDs have a wide range of warmth versus coldness now, but I do not want to get into the business of regulating light bulbs, so I get your point. I totally get your point.
Sneak over there in the middle of the day when they're not home and just switch it for them.
Because I got to tell you, LED street lighting has ruined the urban landscape. The shadows will never be the same, and it just bugs me every time I go walking. They're kind of cool in their geometric aspect, but they've ruined the quality of night walks, and I'm upset about this, but I'm not going to win. So.
Is that all, Mr. Paul?
That's it. Yes, sir.
Okay. So he brought up plants and trees and things. Is there any one of these, do you think any of these covers potential vegetation that's potentially causing problems? Trees that are built too close to the foundation or leaning or hanging over the property that could potentially affecting
Good
the
point,
roof?
if you want to add that.
You got me on board. I guess is that,
Now, could we include that in structural? And, tree removal can be fairly expensive. Repair failing. Yeah, if you want to add that, we can certainly do it.
okay.
Anyone else strong on trees?
I think it's a really good, I think it's a really good point that you raised, but fighting for trees so hard in my neighborhood, it worries me a little that people will be,
Put off by
or try to I'm going to remove, all these trees that.
I think they would have to have some kind of a finding for it.
If they're bringing that to the Mills Act as a work item, they're going to be bringing evidence
They
of
need it.
what
Because
the
it shows up
issue
in home
is.
inspection reports. Inspectors will say, particularly ficus trees, this is built too close to the house. It could easily cause problems with the foundation. And
case by case.
And I guess we can
these are all
make a
case by case
determination.
basis.
True. Nothing would be in there.
And there's, ones that are, leaning over a garage that, or whatever. There's people that bring arborists out all the time for their home as one of their inspections. I'm not saying our people need to, but there are findings oftentimes about trees. I don't think we're going to get it every time, but
No, and we've allowed tree removals when it's clear there's an issue, so.
Can we take a break?
no. Sorry.
We're almost done.
I don't think we're almost done. No, thank you for asking. Yes, we're going to take a 5-minute break, everybody.
Try to be almost done.
Yes.
The number of hours that we spent on this is
We'll be back
cumulatively.
at 7:25.
Okay, recess, please.
I may have some people here who are over 18.
Can't be in the room with you. Are you in a one-room house or a multi-room house?
I'm in a one-room house. I'll tell them to just hold off on coming over.
Yeah, that's safest. Thanks for letting us know.
We're back, everybody. It is 7:25. Okay, so we've finished the point chart, right? Moving on. Do we want to, now that we've done the point chart, maybe we discuss and wrap up the idea of what inspections and when? Right now, you said there really isn't consensus. There wasn't consensus before, right?
I thought there was. I thought termite every 10 years. I thought there was consensus. Building inspection at time of application. Oh, my mic is off, sorry. Thanks, I just caught it, yeah. Okay, going back to answer your question, I thought we had consensus on termites once every 10 years. And on building inspection, I thought we had just a one-time at application.
Yeah, that seems.
That is useful for me to go through that, and, you know, some homeowners will be less savvy or more savvy, and someone who kind of is, well, it's all Greek to me, I may look at that and see there's something that we need to talk to them about adding as a work item.
Great, okay. What else do we need to talk about? Scoring? Is that the next page?
Well, if you know, that would be an appropriate thing to talk about. I stand behind this system, and if you have specific thoughts, we can certainly tweak it.
As one who's made many a rubric, grading many performance reviews for students, I think that works just fine. I like it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a concern about it, and that is the idea of, because I do want to preserve some discretion for the HPC, my concern is because council members have varied interest in preservation and, you know, to be honest, not a lot of knowledge about it, I worry that they will see a number like that, like one number, and say that has to be the determining factor. I absolutely think that we need to have an accounting of the cost and take that into consideration. But rather than having the ratio, what I would prefer to see, but I understand that not everyone may feel this way, is that we have the points and we have the cost, and that we ourselves make a decision taking those factors into consideration.
Rather than have the two work together.
The ratio.
Rather than have the two work together to create a separate number.
Yes.
A final number of sorts.
And I think we are never going to remember what it's called. And I think that that is going to be the thing that will be.
I mean, I think I
stumble
kind of
over,
like
but-
that idea, because then there's, in a way, there's three elements that we're considering. We're considering points, we're considering score, and we're considering the so far named wow factor that we aren't giving any arbitrary points to.
Which we could also consider doing. There could be discretionary points.
I was thinking that as you were saying that, do we go back to the chart and add a category for whatever we're calling that?
And if,
Or do we leave that, or do we leave it separated?
and if we did, though, then that would be a strong argument for getting rid of the ratio, because you can't, to use the wow factor as something that you multiply by the cost savings just seems a little, I don't know, that seems a little odd to me. But
So
This whole thing was the attempt to level the playing field, where you're taking it as kind of a more subjective place, but your concern about council is clear. I wonder if, what was I just thinking? You know, I think the number, when we go to council and we can say, hey, these people, we're expecting they're going to make at minimum $100,000 over 10 years in savings, and they're offering us $25,000 in work versus someone who's offering $75,000. I want that to be clear to council in one way or another, which we could do without this system. We could put that in the report just as a chart with, you know, so we could use this top piece, the determining savings. So it could be savings, points, and wow, and what was the other one you just said, Chris? I thought there was
I think
points,
Costs.
points overall cost.
Yeah, cost.
Savings in a across the board kind of level playing field sense. Or we could just do this, we could just have savings, real world savings for each property, assuming, well, no, I think we'd have to assume a 50% reduction because we have no idea what the tax savings is going to be. So if we got rid of the final point determination and just had these three factors that you guys weigh and council weighs, we did say that we were ranking them, and you could still rank them based on that. I don't see any problem with that. And I think that's within, it's not too dramatic a tweak of what we told council. And if they don't like it, they can tell us to go back to this, so.
So are you suggesting that that all three of these tables go away, or they're not used?
All three of those tables relate to the ratio. The final score is based on I don't even know, sorry, I'm tired, I'm jet lagged. And I don't, it's one reason I want to get rid of it. Oh, sorry, I don't have my mic on. Yes, we get rid of those tables because we would no longer be trying to come up with the ratio between the expenditure and the tax savings. There'd be points, there'd be expenses, and there'd be the cost savings.
Okay, from a homeowner standpoint, from an application, would that top table be useful? Or is it just enough to say that there's, approximately a 50% tax, or not 50% tax savings, but
I think we would keep the top table, we'd drop the two lower tables and have this three-factor determination, which the commission can weigh as they feel is appropriate in terms of making a staff recommendation, which I think I'm supposed to do ultimately. I can do the same thing. So, I don't have a strong issue.
So, go ahead.
Using Kathy's comparison to the SAT, there's the open-ended essay question, that kind of is like maybe a parallel to the wow factor. And I think that, well, I guess my question is, we assigned a point or points to the wow factor from the subjective. That's like the subjective part of what we would be looking at. Does that go not into where does that go?
That would be its own.
I think it would be a fourth category, which I think we do have to identify. We're not going to call it the wow factor.
Yeah, we should give it a proper
It gets
name.
closer to the bang for the buck concept. We will not use that term, but I can picture some,
Attributing.
because it is definitely more subjective than these other things.
Environment or impact, overall impact.
Impact is good, I think.
Yeah, neighborhood impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I would prefer not to assign points to that, because what makes me nervous is trying to pretend that something subjective is objective.
Right. As if we're adding all of these things up at the end.
Right, but we could high,
Gotta figure out some
high,
way
low,
to-
modest, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's important to try to, yes, I think it is important. There could be, and I don't know if this gets solved tonight, but I think there could be a beneficial exercise in, clearly, we believe in the existence of this wow factor or neighborhood impact, but I feel like there must be a way to better articulate that into what specifically that is in terms of character defining features, in a way that we may be able to articulate something a little more even keel or objective out of this. Originally, when I brought this up, it was to better articulate the point system, because I I understand what Commissioner Yerk is saying about leaving a little bit of flexibility open, but I was just trying to think of a way to take things that were kind of ephemeral and articulate them and put them in the point structure initially, instead of just leaving them totally wide open, because that could be really, really open to all kinds of subjective things. I don't think ultimately a wow factor is totally subjective. I think if we drill down on it, we'll find what it is, whatever that is.
Yeah,
We
and
just
that
don't
might,
have
that
an
might happen over time. It's going to be hard to do right now, I think.
We don't have to do it right
And
now.
while I
Yeah.
liked the term neighborhood impact, we do regularly use the concept of public benefit in our discussions, so that might,
Much better.
and council's going to recognize that that's, our field is, there's subjectivity in the world. We cannot step away from that, and I don't want to, or else I'm out of a job. So, so I think,
I was going to say, pretty soon AI is going to be doing all of this for us anyway. Okay, so. What was that? They already do. Feels like we're good on this sort of.
I think so.
Concept,
I
right?
think we've made a lot of progress.
Okay, so then let me ask the process. Let's revisit, not revisit to make changes necessarily, but so we all understand the process and that there's dates involved. This is in this program, all applications have to be in by a certain point, by a certain
Right.
date, right?
Yeah.
And then, so let's say 5 applications come in next year by a certain date. You have, though, do all 5 of those, after, presuming they all qualify, as far as you're concerned, qualify, do you prepare reports for all 5 of them and we're presented all 5 of them? That's the part where I forget what happens, because we only had 2.
When we were thinking this as a point-based, competition, or however we want to think of it, I did picture that it would be most fair to consider them all at the same hearing. That probably would be a little unwieldy, but I can picture, we can dig down quickly, show each house a few pictures, have these charts with whatever numbers that we're going to have. I may not even, maybe I'll weigh in on the public benefit or just leave that to you, I don't know. And then we can still have a ranking, definitely. And we may not agree on that, and you're going to figure it out, and then that's what we take to council. So I would recommend, I think if we stretch it out over 2 hearings, it's not fair to the applicants necessarily. And so I'll just have to figure out a way to streamline the presentation so that it's not, I don't want to take 2 hours on each application, so.
Commissioner Head.
This may be an obvious question, but the applications would involve our site visits?
No,
No.
we don't do site visits on these, do we?
Well,
we didn't before.
Well, you do on Mills X for Glendale Register, so I don't see why you wouldn't for these.
We didn't for the other 2. Specifically didn't. We were told we weren't going to, and we did
Oh,
not.
that's right. Let me rethink that. Yeah,
I think they would be useful.
yeah, let me rethink that as an,
I mean, I think useful with
because
the
I'll go back to my notes and why that,
and everything in
jumped
hand,
out at
not
me.
before he prepares his report, obviously.
I have a thought on this. I think it would be, I'm envisioning down the road. So let's say 5 or 6 years from now, there's a lot of people applying, a lot of contributors applying for this, like, let's say 10 or 12 a year or something. I would not want to, as a commissioner, I would not want to have to be in a position to look at all 10 or 12 of those properties in person. I would like to think that there's a way to sort of sift some of them out and then only do the site visits for the ones that, we know how many staff can do a given year. Staff will give us a sense of that. And then the ones that have a likelihood of actually getting a Mills, not every last applicant.
yeah, there's some, I'm sort of remembering why I thought that. And because there's when someone's applying for the Mills Act with the Glendale Register, your first and foremost concern is whether this place is eligible for the register. if you're just visiting someplace for the Mills Act and one property owner is just so nice and just knows so much and gives you the greatest tour you've ever had, and someone else seems like they're less savvy, they don't understand things as much, but they may be equally deserving, but their presentation isn't as good. I know that you guys should be able to filter that and factor that into your decision-making, but if I remember what I was thinking, that was at least a big part of it in terms of no site visits. Daniel's point, if we do have a lot of applications, is that doable? You know, we'd
I mean, a
probably,
meeting with 5 visits would seem like a lot.
yeah, we'd probably only have that item. I probably wouldn't schedule other items for that hearing, especially at the beginning of this process, until we see how it goes. But
You know, I
let
feel
me,
like,
I can, you know, we can, certainly we need to resolve that before the next hearing, when we bring the 2 applications back. And I'd like to talk to some of my colleagues to see what they think, because I think there is the big difference between why you do a Glendale Register site visit as opposed to why you're doing the Mills Act visit.
yeah.
So.
Kathy?
Oh, I was just going to say that for me, when I do the site visit, considering the Mills Act conditions is a very important part of what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, I know that, yeah.
So it just, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not.
I'm immune to charm, so.
Okay, so
Yeah, I'll talk to some colleagues and figure that out. It may be something, since this is a continuation of these 2 items,
yeah, need to bring them up.
maybe not changing horses now. And then the other issue will be, both applicants have not changed things that they said they were going to back then. So I have to see if there are any changes forthcoming before the hearing. And I would, just so you know, the reason this took a while to bring to you, I forgot that you had asked to have this separate discussion. I thought we were going to have this discussion when we were bringing the 2 applicants back. And so all last year, like I think 3 times I had dates scheduled. Oh, I can't make this date, I can't make that date. And then finally we had one, I think in October, and that's when I went back to the tape and watched the whole thing. And I realized, oh, you specifically asked for this discussion, so. So again, I'm not sure about changing horses now, so.
So back to the train of thought I was on a minute ago. So that's our process. So we could potentially have, I guess, do we want to, I don't think it's a snowball now. It could potentially be one. And then maybe we just cross this bridge when we get here. Jay can say to us, I got 8 applications this year. Are we really doing 8 in one? Or maybe we split it up and in one meeting we agree that we're going to assign one contract, and then in the second meeting we agree we're going to assign, if possible, the other one. Like that's where that kind of becomes problematic.
How do we say who's in which group?
Which also then leads to my next question is, does everyone feel comfortable with savings, tax savings, points, overall expenses, and public benefit being the criteria that we use when we've got 5 houses before us? One of them, let's say, is a 4,000 square or 3,500 square foot house. One is a 1,400 square foot house. By nature of the fact of their size, probably on average, the 3,500 square foot house is going to outscore everyone on potentially many things. Certainly tax savings, they're going to get the most tax savings, although I don't know exactly how that's playing into our overall decision. But
So it helps look at the relationship between tax savings and
what they're spending.
Yeah.
So I guess my concern is this: do we feel like this system is as equitable as we want it to be if we've got a big imbalance in the actual structure that we're looking at, the actual property that we're looking at? My concern is that if you've got 5 and 2 of them are large, just because they're large, there's a good chance that many of their points and costs and things are going to be much higher. Is that where public benefit comes in? I mean,
Possibly.
That's for us to determine and deliberate.
And it also, think in terms, we've had 2 small scale, modest Tudor houses come that were chock full of character defining features. And it's usually, a bigger house, especially with Spanish houses, usually has more character features than a smaller house. houses from the 20s have more character features than houses from the 30s generally. I don't know, I hear your point and the question, but I just wonder how would we do that without becoming more, more point-based or more ranking,
Yeah, I mean, my concern
would we
being
give a
that,
handicap to a smaller house and give them bonus points or something?
I feel like, I think you raised a really good point. I feel like we've created a good template, and in part, the maximum assessed value is likely going to take care of
You're
a
right,
lot of
yeah,
this
that's caps at 1.5.
for us. Right, because the 3,500 square foot,
Yeah, it's probably.
Oh, true, yeah, I hadn't thought of that, yeah.
Right, so that's true, they're all assessed value. Right.
they're all going to be one bedroom, one bath.
Yeah. Fortunately, the assessment doesn't climb
Soon
quite
we
as
will
much
lose-
like the market.
Yeah, LA had a 1.5 million cap for Mills Act for years, and prices shot way past that. So for every single application, they had to make a special exception. Daniel probably went through that, and then they changed the cap to reflect
I
reality.
mean, we
so-
almost need to ask them to do it now, but, we'll see. Let's start with this and see how overrun we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, it hasn't been a landslide so
Yeah.
far.
Okay, so is there,
What I'd like to do is read back what I've heard. I don't think there was consensus on developing a threshold as Chris was championing. I'm just this is kind of in order of our discussion. For roofs, we're going to look at 50% of the roof repair cost will be the expense for the property. And then we're going to focus on deteriorated roofs that are deteriorated at the time of application and on proposals to do restorative work to a roof, whether it's put on yesterday or whenever, in the effort to bring back the historic appearance of the property. For termites, we're going to do a report every 10 years. For building inspection, we'll do it just at the time of application. We're going to keep all of the systems line items and points. We're going to keep the structural. And did we add something there? Yes, right? Did we add something to structural? I thought we did.
Don't think to structural. I think we talked about it in structural, but we added it to the.
Oh, we added trees. We
Dry-
added
that was in
removal of
structural?
a tree. I'm not sure that there was consensus on that.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. We're going to add, for the restoration, we're going to add, where did this go? Inappropriate hardscape. The list of adjectives will be there. And then also fences, walls, and gates will be a separate line. We're going to, I'll think about the site visit issue. I don't recommend that we do it now. It doesn't seem quite right, but for this year's applications or whenever. And then we're going to change the scoring system, so we're not going to use the calculation. We're just going to look at points as an item, expenses as an item, tax savings as an item, and public benefit. And I'll figure out what that means. I think I'll probably, three levels seems usually like the easiest way to make that kind of assessment. So high, moderate, low is where I'm pointing, if you guys have any thoughts on that.
that seems appropriate.
All right. And that's what I've got in terms of changes to the system that we looked at.
Jay, I have a quick question.
Yes, Commissioner
for
Paul.
you. Yes, okay, thank you. We, each year the Mills Act comes up, will we find out, or will it be conveyed what the, how many are able to be taken on by staff on a given year? I'm assuming it may be flexible from one year to another.
Yeah, well, that's kind of our determination as applications come in. We're not going to artificially hold them, except if we had to, because we just can't find the time for the processing. So that's not really a commission determination. That happens at staff level.
I'm just curious. because one of the things that tripped me up before, and it sounds like it's been resolved, I mean, knock on wood, I hope so, but I was under the impression that that this was so competitive that if you had room for 2 applications, you were waiting for the second application. If one person had applied, you were waiting for the second one to apply, to compete one against the other. And I took that initially to think that one person was absolutely not going to get a Mills Act and one person was. But from what I gathered tonight and from what you're saying, hypothetically, if there's room for 2 contributors per staff availability, and there's 2 applications, or let's say it was 4, let's say there was room for 4 contributors and there's 4 applications, provided each one can get a tax savings and they have items where the Mills Act could benefit them, all 4 of them hypothetically could get a Mills Act. Is that correct?
I think Kathy was correct. I didn't remember this, but I think council wanted to limit it to 2.
Right.
Over the
Okay,
years,
so
they've
let's
been a
say-
little concerned about tax loss over time.
Got it.
And that
So
number
for
could change, and there could be lobbying from the community to change that number if this program starts picking up. But yeah, right now, we'll take in 8, 10 applications if we got them in 1 year. Only 2 of those would ultimately potentially be able to receive the Mills Act. It's possible at the end, 1 of them would get it or 0 would get it, so.
Right, got it. And so, but hypothetically, if you have room for 2 and there's 2 applications who could benefit from the Mills Act and both of them have reasonable need, hypothetically, they could both be awarded a Mills Act.
Yeah, that's what I just said. We can award 2, we can award 1, or we could award 0.
Okay, good. Thank
And I
you.
shouldn't say we, council will make that call.
Thank you.
So there are just 2 points I wanted to make. One is that this came up sort of obliquely in previous discussions, and I just wanted to make sure that, because there was all this conversation about a ranked process, a competitive process, I think that we should be able to move forward if there's only 1 application. I don't think we need to have 2. I don't think we need to make 1 person wait, especially given the pace at which applications have come in. I think that we could just explain our decision to council. We feel strongly that this should qualify because of whatever reasons. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like if there's a specific application period, January 1st to May 31st,
Yeah.
if you get an application and you get
So one
get
could-
reviewed. I
Right.
mean, that seems like it should be
Great.
the way to go.
Yeah, that's pushing the boundary that I was concerned about. And what we could do is, when this is agendized for council, part of the staff report could discuss, policy for the program in general before we talk or after we talk about the applications, and just present that idea.
I mean, I'm not sure it needs to be, I'm not sure it would need to be presented. If someone submits an application, the application should be considered. It's merit-based, and, I mean, I just can't imagine that council really meant that you can't move forward if you only get 1. They just don't.
Well, I'll talk to my colleagues.
Okay.
But my thinking is that was presented to them, that this is, just because you're 1 doesn't mean you're going to get it. So it's not first come, first served. I get that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll talk to everyone and see if they see any issue with that.
Okay, thanks. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up, and I hope that this can be quick, is that in the 2020 report, it said that work completed prior to the contract date cannot be included in the work plan unless HPC recommends its inclusion at the Mills Act hearing. And I do think that it's important that we retain that ability, and that in a case where it seems deserving, that that could be communicated as to an applicant as within our purview, because when is someone kind of most likely going to be tackling big projects, and when is most convenient? It's if they're buying a place and they want to get the work done right away. Or, for example, they have a plumbing emergency that has to be taken care of immediately. But, so I want us to retain that flexibility. So I just wanted to make sure that that would still be an option. I know that that's,
I'm cool with that. I would want to put some sort of timeline on it. A new buyer who purchased the property within 6 months of application or something like that, rather than, someone who bought it 3 years ago and already had done the work. Because I get your point. Everyone wants to fix their roof before they move in, so.
so I would suggest actually making it 2 years, because if they've, hopefully, if they've done the work and they've done the work badly, they're going to be out of luck. But if they've really done it well and they've spent a ton of money, I'm thinking to how much money we spent on our house before we moved in. You can spend your Mills Act tax savings for a couple decades. And I just wouldn't want anyone penalized for that. So that's, but if that seems agreeable, then.
Yeah, to play devil's advocate, maybe perhaps in the first couple of years, because this process has taken so long to get started, I think 2 years is maybe appropriate. I would feel more comfortable with a year. I don't think we should assume that buyers do the work when they buy their house. None of these homes would have old wiring and old pipes if that's what happened. They wouldn't even be talking about it. So I don't think that's necessarily the case. And people can, I think we should encourage people. I think that there should be, the encouragement should be, or the position should be, if you want to be part of this program, be a part of this program. Hold off on what you're doing unless you've got a leak, an active leak. I'm not talking about that. Obviously, you fix things that need to be fixed. But in terms of major upgrades and things like that, I would prefer to say, get on it. And you've got, anything you do in the last year, fine. 2 years, maybe in the first couple of years, because we've been so delayed, maybe, particularly if there was something that happened with our current applicants, if they had to do something in the last year or two because of the long list took, obviously we should consider that. But I would hesitate to.
We already were considering that, so.
I would be, I can understand where you're coming from, especially since the application process itself and all of that takes several months. You're potentially looking at someone getting 2.5 years of time, really, depending on what is the 2-year period. Is it the 2 year from when we hear it? Is it the 2 year from when they applied? Is it 2 years from Jay's report being done? When does that 2-year clock start retroactively? In my mind, it would be the calendar year, or like if they applied in February of this year, they could have, in my mind, back until January 1st of last year.
We could also tie it to permits. If they, within the year prior to application, receive permits for some of the work that's going to go on, then we have a date when it was permitted, and then we can.
But where is our going back point from? The date of their application, the date that you prepare your staff report, the date we hear
I
it?
think it would be date of application would be the easiest, and it's fairest to everyone.
Okay.
So.
The date you receive the application, we go back. So we need to get consensus on this. So I say for the immediate future, I can support 2 years. Beyond that, I would prefer 1 year. What do you think, Mr. Doom?
I think what Jay said, date of application, and 2 years is fine.
Now, where the two current cases are done, we're going to take those, and we already agreed to accept some of the work that was done prior. I don't have the date in front of me, but the application date is, I think, May to September, May to August, something like that. So it hasn't even opened yet, so we don't know what's coming for this year. I don't know why we would have to have 2 years for the first year and then go back to 1 year. I still think one year feels right to me for people who are buying a house. People are starting work immediately. People are starting work before they, I assume no one's starting work before they close escrow, but they're certainly starting work before they have permits. And and that's why tying it to permits in a way feels good to me. But
And then about that, do we have a requirement that that work had been permitted?
Oh, absolutely.
well,
Because people replumb their houses all the time that
No,
aren't
there
permitted.
are some things, replacing a light fixture doesn't require a permit. Walls and fences
If
require
someone
approval,
replaced all
but
their
not a
plumbing and
permit.
didn't get a permit for it, people do that all the time.
Well, if-
I got news
Well, I
for
don't
you.
think we should reward any
So I think
unpermitted work.
I think it should, not only are we giving you a little bit of a grace period in time, but the work has to have been permitted.
I would piggyback on Catherine with the 2 years, just because of what we've seen recently with the shortages and as well as high costs and supply chains. 2 years, we're still catching up, and we're not going to catch up for a while. So I think 2 years works for me. If you want to go with 1 year, I'm flexible with that too.
I don't understand.
Oh, why don't,
And that, though.
so Chris, you suggested that we start with 2 years and then we can revisit. Is that?
Well, I mean, not to a date uncertain, but yes. I mean, I think for these, maybe even just what Jay thinks that, I guess I'm of the assumption that the part of the reason we haven't received any applications for this is because those that may have been interested have seen that it was a little bit of a hot mess there for a while and were just put off from the idea, knowing that they weren't going to get anywhere.
barely had any inquiries, so.
So then maybe we don't need to do that. So I think a retroactive year, just so we're clear about what we're talking about, because I don't know that you're.
I got lost and we're listening
Well,
to.
I don't know how the concern you have about the supply chain thing relates to what this particular issue is. So what she's talking about is if someone did work prior to submitting their application, she would like
To redo it.
No, that's not what this is about. So let's say someone submits an application today, but June of last year, they replumbed their entire house. The question here is, can they retroactively get the points and the cost for all of that work that they did, even though it's already done? And it's not something they're going to be doing moving
So
forward.
that's the 1 year we're looking at.
That's the
1
year, 2 year, how far
prior.
back we're going to go to give credit for work they already did.
So I would
Right?
like to, yes,
that right?
yes.
Okay.
And I would like to make the pitch for 2 years because I don't think, our goal here is the more complete preservation of historic district contributors. And I think if people spent 2 years doing a perfect job and, and the plumbing thing, it's hard to get excited about the plumbing.
Yeah.
But if they have, gotten, replacements for their windows that are historically, you can just spend a lot of money doing that. I feel like, well, but you did it 13 months ago, so you're not going to get credit for any of that. If that's the difference between someone saying, then why would I want to get this contract, or I'm not going to apply, 8 years later, a new buyer comes in and replaces all those windows with dual pane, fiberglass or a combination of fiberglass and vinyl. I just want to incentivize this as much. I've just seen what happens to contributors in historic districts, and it's talking about a hot mess.
Yeah.
I just want to incentivize it.
I guess.
And if they're doing permitted work, I don't think we need to be just kind of draconian. It's, you had a year or 13 months.
I'd
That's
still
just my
like the
sense.
2 years then, for that purpose, to incentivize people and not cut them off at 13 months, so I'm on 2 years.
I have a question.
Yes.
So is there, I think I think Jay mentioned that it would be 2 years from when the application was received, but then does that kind of set up a first come, first served situation that's unintended? Because isn't there otherwise kind of a hard and fast deadline for when all the Mills Act applications should be in by a given cycle?
Yeah, but I'm not sure that changes no, I'm not sure I understand your question, I guess.
I guess what I'm getting at is I understand, I don't have a strong opinion either way over 1 year versus 2 years, but we've tried to make it very equitable. And you had mentioned before that you don't want to have any circumstances where somebody gets any sort of preferential treatment for submitting an application in before someone else within a given year for the Mills Act. But if somebody submits an application before, I guess maybe, never mind. I see what I see. So there's no bias against another applicant. They just basically have this is more internal to a given application. Okay, never mind. Sorry, I answered my own question.
This does raise a question for me in terms of how we process window replacement applications. So we treat Glendale Register properties different than historic district properties. We're more lenient with materials. We allow insulated glazing and simulated divided lights for a regular district contributor. Not everyone in the community agrees with this, but it's a decision that's been in place for a long time now. I treat that differential. If someone has a Glendale Register property and they came to me, and this hasn't happened, and said, I want to replace my windows, I would make sure they were deteriorated. Otherwise, we'd go with restoration. I would, if they needed to replace them, I would say, I can approve new wood windows or new steel sash with single strength glass. If you want to put insulated glazing in, I'm going to take you to the commission for their review. For a Mills Act property in a historic, for a contributor, I would like to do the same thing. I would like that to be the policy. And if someone wants to replace their windows before they apply, if they have replaced them, I would probably just, we don't counsel everyone. Everyone doesn't talk to us before they apply for work. Some people buy their windows before they get their permit, and they're screwed sometimes. But I would like to, use the same standard. And if someone, whether it's the retroactive person who's doing the work before they get before they apply, I'll have to start telling people, hey, if you're interested in this program, you might either want to hold off on the replacement or do it this way. And there aren't a ton of people who want to put single pane glass in their windows anymore. I'm a holdout, you're a holdout, I'm sure many of us are holdouts here, but that's not common. So that's gonna, change where people decide. But if you could let me know if that sounds right to you in terms of
Please.
windows specifically.
Yeah.
I had a feeling you'd all like that. Just came to mind, I hadn't thought about it, so.
So I guess, yeah.
And that's covered it's covered here, replace severely deteriorated sash in kind. So that's clear. When we're talking about inappropriate sash, that means we're going to go back to period appropriate windows. So single strength glass, real divided lights.
So that might be an automatic, if someone redid their windows a year and a half ago, and they would have to, in order to get the Mills Act, have to go, and they didn't do wood single pane, that might just be the deal
Might
killer for them.
disqualify
They'd be like,
them.
yeah, I'm out.
Yeah, you guys may say, sorry, you're not a good
Probably
candidate.
Wouldn't even apply. I guess that would be information that would be good for you to know going, well, you'll do a site visit.
We wouldn't count that toward their.
Right, it wouldn't go toward, oh, right, so in
Yeah.
that case, it wouldn't go toward, we wouldn't count
It
it.
wouldn't contribute, plus
Would it-
you would, you would say like, oh, we'll give you if the house had other qualities that appealed to you, you'd say, well, you may be a better candidate if you replace your windows or replace the new windows with appropriate windows and maybe apply next year, or, we'll have to see how that goes.
Well, when you do your site visit, that's probably a conversation you'd have with them. I mean, you'd be like,
Yeah,
look, this
definitely,
is something
so-
you've got to get an estimate for. You've got to get an estimate for replacing your brand new windows with single pane wood windows. That would be
Right.
part of their work plan, right?
Okay, so
Okay.
I think that's covered already, so
Good.
good.
Is that it for this?
I think so, yes.
Okay. There's one more.
One more item.
Community Development Department updates. Update on pending
This is
Bellhurst
quick.
Historic District Survey.
So we had to return the draft survey to the survey team. with some, some significant comments. We met last week, and they've addressed most of those, but they've addressed them in concept, but haven't changed the document fully. So I'm expecting to receive the amended document in March, and we're going to bring that to you. Oh, first we have to have the community meeting. So I'm hopeful to have the community meeting in April or the first half of May. I'm going to be out the second half of May, so it's very likely we're going to cancel HPC that month unless we have a special meeting. There's a major need. So I'm estimating that by June, we should have the applicants out, because this is still under the old system, so they're doing the second petition, which we would authorize immediately after the HPC hearing. They're authorized to start submitting or circulating the petition. So that'll either happen in May or June, I guess. Or, I'm sorry,
May.
It could be April,
June.
possibly, but that feels like it's pushing it. So I'm guessing June.
Okay.
So that's my update.
Wow.
But the survey team did a great job, but there were just several things that we just needed to work on. They particularly did a good job on looking at the exclusionary racial issues, and they found some information that takes us further than the previous. We've asked all of the recent survey teams to kind of include information about that, and for whatever reason, they found some good stuff, including an actual covenant. And I don't know if you heard, but the county is going to start either deleting or redacting documents in their files that have the covenants, which as a history kind of person, I'm like, I don't know if that's the right thing to do exactly. I know what your goals are, but it's erasing history. And kind of, but I'm not sure how they're doing it. So they may be taking that into account. So, anyways, that's all I've got. So we can.
Thank you. With that, we're adjourned, 8:11. See you all next month.
March 21st.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.